Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Nightmare Narratives. I can picture some of you already in bed, maybe some of you just getting home from work. Wherever you are, whatever time it is, I'm glad you're here. If this helps you relax or sleep, please like and subscribe. It means a lot. Now let's get you comfortable, and I'll tell you tonight's story. My name is Margaret Steelridge, but everyone calls me Maggie. I'm a park ranger and historian here in the Blue Ridge Mountains of North Carolina, and I need to tell you about something that happened to me last fall. Something that changed everything I thought I knew about history. I've been working these mountains for 3 years now, ever since I left my teaching job at the university. My friends thought I was crazy to give up a good position for outdoor work, but I needed to get my hands dirty with real history. Books can only tell you so much. Sometimes you have to walk where people walked, touch what they touched. My specialty is Civil War history, especially the small mountain communities that got caught up in that mess. Most people don't know how many little settlements just vanished during the war years. Families would pack up and leave in the middle of the night, or sometimes whole towns would empty out when the fighting got too close. I was working on a book about these lost places when I found the cabin. It was late October, and the leaves had fallen enough that you could see the old stone foundations scattered through the woods. I was up on Devil's Backbone Ridge, a narrow strip of high ground that runs along the parkway. Local folks always said that ridge was haunted, but then again, they say that about half the mountains around here. The fog was thick that morning. It seemed to hang in the valleys and roll up the mountainsides like something alive. I'd been hiking since dawn, taking photographs and making notes about the old home sites. Most were just piles of rocks now, maybe a chimney still standing. But this one was different. I almost walked right past it. The cabin sat back in a grove of old oak trees, and at first glance it looked like just another shadow in the mist. But when I got closer, I could see it was still standing. Not just standing, it lay yaws. Oaked like someone had walked out yesterday. The logs were tight and straight. The chinking between them was solid. Even the wooden shingles on the roof looked good, though they should have rotted away decades ago. There was a small porch with a rocking chair and windows with real glass still in them. I felt cold just looking at it. Not normal cold. This was different. It was like the air around the cabin was thicker, older somehow. My breath came out in white puffs even though it wasn't that chilly. I pulled out my camera and took some pictures, then checked my maps. According to everything I had, there shouldn't be any structures in this area. No record of any settlement, no old property lines, nothing. But here it was, solid as stone. The door was unlocked. I know I should have been more careful, but I'm a historian. Finding something like this is like striking gold. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The first thing that hit me was the smell. Not musty or rotten like you'd expect, but clean. Like someone had just finished scrubbing the floors. There was a table with 2 chairs, a stone fireplace, and a bed in the corner with quilts folded neat as you please. On the table was a plate with what looked like cornbread crumbs. Beside it sat a ceramic jug and a letter, folded but not sealed. The paper looked old but not cracked or yellow. I picked it up with shaking hands. The letter was dated September 15th, 1863. It was written in the careful script they taught in those days, and it said, "My dearest Mary, the conscription men came through again yesterday. They took young Thomas and his brother. We have made our decision. The shadow people have offered us a way to stay hidden until this terrible war ends. The price seems small for such protection. We will be safe here, and when peace comes, we will emerge to rebuild. Your loving husband, Samuel." I read it 3 times before my hands stopped shaking. This had to be some kind of historical recreation, maybe put together for tourists, but there weren't any tourists up here. The nearest road was 5 miles down the mountain. I looked around the cabin again. Everything was perfect. Too perfect. The tools hanging on the wall looked like they'd been used yesterday. The ashes in the fireplace were cold but clean, like a fire had burned out just that morning. That's when I noticed something else. My camera hadn't flashed when I took those pictures outside, but the battery gauge showed it was working fine. I tried taking a picture of the letter, but the camera just clicked without doing anything. I decided to head back to my truck and get more equipment. This deserved a proper archaeological survey. But when I turned to leave, I heard something that made my skin crawl. Voices. Quiet, but clear as day. A woman humming, and the sound of a broom sweeping. They were coming from right behind me. I spun around, but the cabin was empty. Just me and the furniture and that letter. But I could still hear the humming, soft and sad, like a lullaby. I got out of there fast. I didn't sleep much that night. I kept thinking about the cabin and that letter, about how everything looked so fresh and clean, about the voices I'd heard. The next morning, I called my friend Dr. Sarah Chen at the university. Sarah teaches folklore and has helped me with research before. She's one of the few academics who takes mountain stories seriously. "Maggie, you found what?" she said when I told her about the cabin. "I know it sounds crazy, but it's there, perfectly preserved. And Sarah, the letter mentions shadow people. I've never heard that term in Civil War documents before." There was a long pause. "Actually, I have. It's rare, but there are a few mentions in Appalachian folklore from that period, always connected to disappearances." That got my attention. "What kind of disappearances?" "Whole families, sometimes entire settlements. They'd just vanish overnight. No signs of violence, no bodies. Found. The local stories said they made deals with shadow people to escape the war." I felt that cold feeling again, even sitting in my warm cabin. Deals? Folklore stuff. The shadows would hide people from the world, keep them safe until the danger passed. But the price was always steep. Usually their souls, or their connection to the living world. After I hung up with Sarah, I spent the day going through historical records. I couldn't find any mention of a settlement on Devil's Backbone Ridge, no property deeds, no census records, no tax rolls. It was like the place had never existed. But I had photographs. Or I should have. When I developed the film from my camera, half the pictures were blank. The shots of the cabin's exterior showed nothing but trees and fog. But the pictures I took inside came out fine. Too fine. They were clearer than they should have been in that dim light. And there was something in them I hadn't noticed before. In the corner of one photo, just at the edge of the frame, there was a shadow that looked like a person. A woman in a long dress standing by the fireplace. But I'd been alone in that cabin. I was sure of it. I had to go back. This time I brought proper equipment, extra cameras, a tape recorder, temperature sensors, and a notebook for detailed observations. I also brought my grandfather's old compass. He'd given it to me before he died, said it would always point me toward home. The fog was even thicker when I reached the ridge. It swirled around the trees like smoke, and I could barely see 10 feet ahead of me. But I found the cabin easily, like it was calling to me. The rocking chair on the porch was moving. I stopped dead and watched it sway back and forth, a steady rhythm like someone was sitting in it. But there was no wind, and no one was there. My hands were shaking as I set up my equipment. The temperature sensors immediate. Eli started acting strange. The readings kept jumping from 45 degrees to 32 and back again. Inside the cabin was even colder, cold enough that I could see my breath. I turned on the tape, recorder, and started documenting everything. October 23rd, 10:15 a.m. Entering the cabin for second visit. Temperature inside approximately 32 degrees. No visible source of cooling. The letter was still on the table, but now there was another one beside it. This one was dated September 20th, 1863. The shadow people keep their bargains well. We have not aged a day since we agreed to their terms. The war rages in the world beyond, but we are safe in our hidden place. Sometimes we see travelers passing through our land, but they cannot see us. It is lonely, but we are alive. Samuel. My heart was pounding. I was holding a letter that should have been impossible, but the paper felt real. The ink looked fresh. That's when I heard the voices again. Clearer this time. A man and woman talking in the next room, except there was no next room. The cabin was just one space. "Mary, did you hear that?" Footsteps outside. Hush, Samuel. It might be soldiers. No, this is different. Someone is in our house. The voices were getting louder, more agitated. I realized they were talking about me. I grabbed my equipment and started backing toward the door, but it slammed shut before I could reach it. The latch turned by itself, trapping me inside. The temperature dropped another 10 degrees. Frost started forming on the windows, and then I saw them. They appeared slowly, like someone was turning up the brightness on an old television. A man and woman in clothes from the 1860s standing by the fireplace. They looked solid, real, but I could see through them to the stone wall behind. The woman, Mary, had long brown hair and a tired face. The man, Samuel, was tall and thin with worried eyes. They were holding hands and staring right at me. "Who are you?" Samuel asked. His voice sounded like it was coming from far away. "How can you see us?" I couldn't speak. My mouth wouldn't work.
Ari stepped forward. "She's not from our time. Look at her clothes, her strange tools. She's from the world beyond."
"That's impossible," Samuel said.
"The Shadow People promised we would be hidden until the war ended."
"Samuel," Mary whispered, and her voice was full of fear.
"What if the war did end? What if we've been here longer than we thought?"
I found my voice.
"The Civil War ended in 1865. It's 1977 now. You've been here for over 100 years.
They stared at me in horror. Then Samuel began to age before my eyes. His hair went white, his skin wrinkled and sagged. Mary screamed and grabbed his arm, but the same thing was happening to her. "The Shadow People," she gasped, as her face grew old and haggard. "They lied to us. We weren't hidden from the war, we were hidden from time itself." The cabin started shaking. Pictures fell from the walls. The temperature plunged so low that ice began forming on my skin. "Help us," Samuel wheezed, now looking like a man of 90. "Break the bargain. Set us free." Then everything went black. I woke up outside the cabin, lying in the frost-covered grass. My equipment was scattered around me, and everything hurt like I'd been thrown from a moving car. According to my watch, 3 hours had passed, but it felt like minutes. The cabin looked different now, older. The logs were weathered gray, and several of the roof shingles were missing. It was still standing, but it looked like what it should have looked like, a building that had been abandoned for over a century. I gathered my equipment and checked it. The cameras were dead, but the tape recorder had kept running. When I played it back, there were voices on it. Not just Samuel and Mary, but others. Lots of others. Children laughing, a baby crying, someone chopping wood, the sounds of a whole community going about their daily lives. And underneath it all, something else. Sound like wind, but deeper, like voices whispering in a language I didn't recognize. I drove straight to Sarah's house 3 hours down the mountain. She took one look at me and made me sit down while she fixed coffee with something stronger in it. "You look like you've seen a ghost," she said. "I think I have, several of them." I told her everything, the letters, the voices, Samuel and Mary aging before my eyes. She listened without interrupting, getting more worried with each detail. "Maggie, you need to stay away from that place. Some doors shouldn't be opened." "But they asked for help. They've been trapped for over a century. By things that made deals for souls. You can't fight that kind of power." But I couldn't let it go. That night I researched everything I could find about shadow people in Appalachian folklore. What I found made my blood run cold. The stories were consistent across different regions and time periods. During times of great danger, wars, plagues, disasters, the shadow people would appear to desperate communities. They offered protection, safety, a way to hide until the danger passed. All they asked in return was a simple bargain: your soul in exchange for sanctuary outside of time. The problem was that the shadow people decided when the danger was over, and they never decided it was safe to return. The communities they protected were trapped forever, slowly forgetting the world beyond their hidden sanctuary. Eventually, most of them forgot they had ever been human at all. But something had gone wrong with Samuel and Mary's community. They'd maintained their memories, their humanity. That shouldn't have been possible under a shadow bargain, unless someone else was supposed to take their place. I understood then why I could see them, why my equipment worked in their presence. The shadow people hadn't just been hiding the settlement. They'd been waiting for someone to find it, someone to complete the bargain. They wanted me to take Samuel and Mary's place. I should have stayed away. Sarah was right about that. But I kept thinking about Mary's face when she realized how long they'd been trapped. About Samuel asking me to help them. About all the other voices on my tape recording. Children who had never grown up, families who had never been reunited. I had to try. The next night, I went back to Devil's Backbone Ridge. This time, I came prepared. I'd spent the day in libraries and archives, learning everything I could about shadow bargains. Most sources agreed on one thing. The contracts could be broken, but only if you found the original agreement and destroyed it. The cabin was fully solid when I arrived, looking exactly like it had on my first visit. Warm light glowed from the windows, and I could smell wood smoke from the chimney. It was like stepping back in time. Samuel and Mary were waiting for me on the porch. They looked young again, the way they had when they first made their bargain. "You came back," Mary said. There was hope in her voice, but fear too. "I said I'd help you. Have you seen others? Your neighbors? Your community?" Samuel nodded toward the woods. "They're here, but they don't remember anymore. The shadow people have had them too long. They think this is all there ever was." As if summoned by his words, figures began emerging from the fog between the trees. Men, women, children, all dressed in clothes from the 1860s. They moved slowly without purpose, like sleepwalkers. Their eyes were empty, reflecting no light. "We tried to resist longer than the others," Mary whispered. "We wrote letters to remember who we were, where we came from. But it's getting harder. Sometimes I forget what season it was when we came here. Sometimes I forget my maiden name." "The shadow people grow stronger as we grow weaker," Samuel added. "Soon we'll be like the others, empty, hollow." That's when I saw them. They came out of the darkness between the trees, and they were not like I'd expected. I'd imagined creatures with claws and fangs, monsters from a nightmare. But the shadow people looked almost human. Tall, thin figures in dark clothes. The only difference was their faces, or rather, the lack of them. Where faces should have been, there was just smooth darkness. Not black skin or masks, but an absence of features entirely. Looking at them was like looking into a deep hole. One of them stepped forward and spoke without moving any part of what should have been its mouth. Its voice came from everywhere at once, like the sound of wind through dead leaves. "The historian has returned. Good. We have waited long for a suitable replacement." "I'm not here to make any deals," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "All who enter our sanctuary must choose. Join us willingly, or have your essence drained slowly like the others. Either way, you will serve our purpose." "What purpose is that?" "To exist. To continue. We are older than your species, older than this world's sun. But we cannot survive without feeding on the life force of mortals. These people have sustained us for over a century." I looked at Samuel and Mary. They were holding hands, but their grip was weak. I could see them fading, becoming more translucent. "Let them go," I said. "They've given you enough." The shadow person made a sound like laughter. "They are ours until their essence is fully consumed. Perhaps another 50 years. But you are young, strong. You could sustain us for twice that long." More shadow people were emerging from the woods, dozens of them surrounding the cabin. The hollow members of the lost community shuffled closer too, their empty eyes fixed on me. "Show me the contract," I demanded. "Show me the original bargain." "Why would we do that?" "Because if you don't, I'll burn this whole place down. Your sanctuary, your feeding ground, everything." I pulled out a flare from my pack. The shadow people hissed and stepped back. Apparently, they didn't like fire. "The contract cannot be destroyed by mortal means," the lead shadow purse, On said. But there was uncertainty in its voice now. "Maybe not, but I bet your sanctuary can be. No cabin, no anchor point. You'd have to start over somewhere else. Find new victims." The shadow people conferred among themselves in their whispering language. Finally, the leader gestured toward the cabin. Very well, but viewing the contract will only confirm what you already know. These souls belong to us, as yours soon will. Inside the cabin, the leader approached the fireplace and pressed its hand against one of the stones. The stone swung inward, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside was a piece of parchment that looked like it was made from something that had never been alive. The contract was written in two languages, English and something else, something that hurt to look at. The English portion was simple. We, the undersigned residents of Sanctuary Ridge, do freely give our eternal souls to the Shadow Collective in exchange for protection from all earthly dangers until such time as said dangers no longer exist. Signed this day, September 15th, 1863. Below that were dozens of signatures, including Samuel's and Mary's. But it was the fine print that interested me. There was a clause, written in tiny script at the bottom. This contract may be voided if the original danger for which protection was sought can be proven to no longer exist, and if a blood relative of the contracted parties formally requests their release. I read it 3 times to make sure I understood. Then I smiled. The contract can be broken, I announced. The shadow people hissed in unison. Impossible. We wrote that contract. There are no living blood relatives. You're wrong. I've been researching these families for 3 years. Samuel and Mary Patterson had a son who survived the war. He moved to Tennessee and had children. I can trace their lineage. I pulled out my genealogy notes. Their great-great-granddaughter is alive right now. Her name is Elizabeth Patterson Morris, and she lives in Knoxville. Even if that were true, the lead shadow person said, she would have to come here and request their release in person. I smiled wider. No, she wouldn't. According to the contract, a formal request is sufficient, and I happen to have one. I'd spent most of the day tracking down Elizabeth Morris and explaining the situation. She'd thought I was crazy at first, but when I played her the tape recording of her ancestors' voices, she'd agreed to help. She'd written and signed a formal request for their release, which I'd had notarized. The shadow people were becoming agitated, their forms flickering like bad television reception. This is trickery, legal manipulation. You wrote the contract, I said. I'm just following the terms. I pulled out Elizabeth Morris's letter and read it aloud. I, Elizabeth Patterson Morris, great-great-granddaughter of Samuel and Mary Patterson, do formally request the immediate release of my ancestors and all members of their community from any supernatural contracts or obligations, as the danger from which they sought protection, the American Civil War, ended in 1865. Signed and witnessed this day, October 24th, 1977. The effect was immediate. The shadow people began screaming, a sound like breaking glass mixed with static. The hollow community members stopped their shambling and looked around in confusion, awareness returning to their eyes for the first time in over a century. Samuel and Mary became solid again, fully human. Mary was crying. Is it true? She asked. The war is really over? It's been over for 112 years, I told her. The shadow people were dissolving, their forms breaking apart like smoke in the wind. But their leader managed one last threat. You have won this battle, historian. But we are legion. We will find other desperate souls to feed upon, other communities to trap. This is not over. Then they were gone, leaving only the sound of wind through the trees. The change in the community was immediate and profound. Color returned to their faces, life to their eyes. Children who had been shuffling like zombies began laughing and playing. Adults embraced each other, weeping with joy and relief. But their freedom came with a terrible realization. Everyone we knew is dead, Samuel said quietly. Our parents, our siblings, our friends. The world has moved on without us. Mary nodded, tears streaming down her face. Our son, little Tommy, he'd be older than we are now if he lived. I had to tell them the truth. He did live. He survived the war and had a family. You have descendants, great-great-grandchildren. Truly? Mary's face lit up with hope. Truly, Elizabeth Morris in Knoxville. She's the one who helped break your contract. The community gathered around as I explained what had happened to the world during their absence. The end of the Civil War, Reconstruction, 2 world wars, the moon landing, everything. They listened in amazement and growing sadness as they realized how much time they'd lost. "What happens to us now?" asked an elderly woman I hadn't seen before. "We don't belong in this time. We have no homes, no families who remember us." It was a good question. These people were from 1863, with no understanding of the modern world, no social security numbers or birth certificates, no way to prove they'd ever existed. "Some of you have living descendants," I said. "I can help you find them. As for the rest..." I thought for a moment. There are places in these mountains where people don't ask too many questions, small communities that take care of their own. I think I can help you find somewhere to belong. A young man stepped forward. He couldn't have been more than 20 when the contract was made. "What if we don't want to live in this new world? What if we're ready to rest?" I understood what he was asking. They'd been trapped between life and death for over a century. Some of them might be ready to let go, to move on to whatever comes after. "That's your choice," I told him. "You're free now, free to live, free to die, free to make your own decisions." The community spent the rest of the night talking, holding each other, mourning their losses and celebrating their freedom. Some decided they wanted to find their descendants and try to build new lives. Others chose to let their earthly existence end, to finally rest in peace. Samuel and Mary were among those who chose to stay. "We want to meet our great-great-granddaughter," Mary said. "We want to know what became of our Tommy." As dawn approached, those who had chosen to pass on began to fade. They smiled as they became translucent, their faces peaceful for the first time in over a century. One by one, they disappeared into the morning light. "Thank you," the young man whispered as he faded away. "Thank you for setting us free." By the time the sun was fully up, about half the community remained. 15 people who had decided to live again in this strange new world. I kept my promise. Over the next few weeks, I helped them adjust. I found them temporary housing in a small mountain town where the locals were used to folks with unusual stories. I introduced Samuel and Mary to Elizabeth Morris and watched them weep as they held their descendant for the first time. It wasn't easy. Learning to live in 1977 when you remembered 1863 was harder than any of them expected. But they were determined. They'd survived over a century of supernatural imprisonment. They could survive anything. 6 months later, I finished my book. The Hollow Men of Devil's Backbone, a true account of supernatural survival, was published by a small academic press. Most scholars dismissed it as fiction, but a few took it seriously. The ones who had encountered similar phenomena in their own research. Samuel Patterson got a job at a local historical society, sharing his first-hand knowledge of Civil War-era mountain life. Mary took up quilting again and started teaching the old patterns to young women in the community. They were happy as far as anyone could tell. But I knew their story wasn't over. None of our stories were. The Shadow People had been right about one thing. They were legion. My research had turned up dozens of similar disappearances throughout Appalachian history. Communities that vanished overnight, families that simply stopped existing in official records. And the disappearances were still happening. I'd become something I'd never expected to be, a paranormal investigator with a history degree. Universities called me when they had cases that couldn't be explained through normal research. Families contacted me when their genealogy hit impossible dead ends. And sometimes, late at night, I got calls from people who'd found places that shouldn't exist, buildings that were too well preserved, voices that spoke from empty rooms. I always went. Someone had to. The cabin on Devil's Backbone Ridge is still there, but it's truly empty now. I visit sometimes, just to make sure. The rocking chair doesn't move anymore. The temperature is normal. The only voices you hear are your own echo. But if you know what to look for, you can still see signs of what happened there. On certain foggy mornings, you might glimpse figures in old-fashioned clothes walking between the trees. Not trapped anymore, just visiting, checking on the place that was their home for so long. And if you're very quiet and very patient, you might hear something else. Laughter. Children playing games that haven't been played in over a century. The sound of a community that refused to be forgotten, even by time itself. The shadow people were wrong about something important. They thought they could hollow out those people, drain away everything that made them human. But some things can't be consumed. Love, hope, the connections between people. These things endure. They survive even supernatural imprisonment. Samuel and Mary taught me that. Their community taught me that. And now I teach it to others, through my books and my investigations and my refusal to let the lost stay lost forever. Because history isn't just about dates and battles and famous people. It's about ordinary folks who faced extraordinary circumstances and found ways to survive. It's about communities that looked out for each other, even when that meant making impossible bargains with unknowable forces. And sometimes, if you're very lucky and very persistent, you get to help write the happy endings. My name is Margaret Steelridge, and I'm a historian. I study the places where the past and present meet, where the impossible becomes possible, where the dead refuse to stay buried. And I'm still learning that some stories never really end. They just wait, patient as mountains, for someone to come along and listen. If you ever find yourself on Devil's Backbone Ridge on a foggy morning, stop and listen carefully. You might hear echoes of the hollow men who found their way back to the light. You might hear the whisper of voices that refuse to be silenced. You might hear the sound of freedom, ringing like a bell through the mountains, calling all the lost souls home. My name is Rebecca Thornfield, but everyone calls me Becca. I'm the first woman park ranger in this part of North Carolina, and believe me, some folks never let me forget it. The old-timers still give me looks when I walk into the ranger station, like I'm playing dress-up in my uniform. But I know these mountains better than most of them ever will. I grew up here, learned every trail and creek from my grandmother. She was what people called a granny woman, knew which plants could heal a cut and which ones would make you sick. Most folks thought her stories were just old mountain tales, but she always said the mountains remember everything. It was early spring when the call came in. The wildflowers were just starting to bloom, but the nights were still cold enough to see your breath. I was sitting at my desk, filling out reports about trail damage from the winter storms, when the phone rang. "Ranger station," I answered. "Thank God," a man's voice said, shaky and out of breath. "We need help up on Spruce Mountain. There's a woman up there screaming for help, but we can't find her anywhere." I grabbed my notepad. "Sir, can you tell me exactly where you are?" "We're about halfway up the trail to the fire tower. My wife and I were hiking when we heard her. This woman just screaming, 'Help my babies,' over and over. It's been going on for 20 minutes, but every time we try to follow the sound, it moves." My stomach dropped. Spruce Mountain wasn't a place people got lost easily. The trail was well marked, and there was only one way up to the old fire tower. But I'd heard whispers about that place my whole life. "Sir, I need you and your wife to head back down the trail right now. I'm on my way up." I hung up and grabbed my gear. Radio, first aid kit, rope, everything I might need for a rescue. As I drove toward the trailhead, I tried to push away the stories my mother used to tell. Stories about a woman named Martha Dillard who'd lived up on that mountain back in the 1920s. Stories I'd always thought were just made-up tales to keep kids from wandering too far into the woods. The parking area was empty except for one car. Probably belonged to the couple who called. I shouldered my pack and started up the trail. It was a steep climb, 8 miles to the fire tower, but I'd done it hundreds of times. The forest felt wrong from the start. Usually the woods were full of sounds, birds singing, squirrels chattering, insects buzzing. But today, everything was quiet. Too quiet. Even my footsteps seemed too loud on the dirt trail. About 2 miles up, I found them. A middle-aged couple sitting on a fallen log, the the woman wrapped in her husband's jacket even though it wasn't that cold. "Are you the ranger?" the man asked, jumping up when he saw me. "Thank God. That screaming, it just stopped about 10 minutes ago." His wife looked up at me with wide, scared eyes. "It wasn't natural," she whispered. The sound didn't move like a person walking. It was like it was jumping from tree to tree. I knelt down next to her. "Ma'am, can you tell me exactly what you heard?" A woman's voice, crying for help. She kept saying, "Help my babies. Please help my babies." But when we called back, asking where she was, the voice would just move somewhere else. The husband nodded. We searched for over an hour, found nothing. No footprints, no broken branches, nothing to show anyone had been through there. I helped them gather their things. "I need you both to head back down to your car. I'm going to continue up and check the area." They didn't argue. As they disappeared down the trail, I pulled out my radio to call the station. Static. I tried again, adjusting the frequency. Still nothing but white noise. That was strange. I should have perfect tie-in on this part of the mountain. I kept climbing. The higher I went, the more wrong everything felt. Wildflowers that should have been blooming were withered and brown, but only in perfect circles about 10 feet across. My compass started spinning wildly, the needle never settling on true north, and then I heard it. Faint at first, like wind through the trees. But as I stopped and listened, it became clear. A woman's voice, far away but getting closer. "Help my babies! Please! Someone help my babies!" The voice came from ahead of me, somewhere near the fire tower. I picked up my pace, my heart pounding. Someone was in real trouble up there. But as I climbed higher, the voice seemed to move. First it came from the left side of the trail, then the right, then from behind me. I spun around, calling out, "Ma'am, where are you? I'm a park ranger. I'm here to help." Silence. Then, so close it seemed like the woman was standing right next to me. "Help my babies!" But there was nobody there. I stood perfectly still, trying to control my breathing. The voice had been so close, so clear, but the trail around me was empty. No footprints in the soft dirt, no bent branches, no sign that anyone had passed this way in months. I forced myself to think like a ranger, not like a scared little girl listening to grandmother's ghost stories. People got lost in these mountains all the time. Sounds could bounce off rocks and trees in strange ways. There had to be a logical explanation. I kept climbing toward the fire tower. It was an old wooden structure built back in the 1940s, about 60 feet tall, with a small cabin at the top where someone used to watch for forest fires. Nobody had used it in years. We had better technology now. But hikers still liked to climb up and enjoy the view. The trail got steeper as I climbed. My legs burned, but I pushed on. If someone was hurt up there, every minute counted. That's when I saw the flowers. Not the withered ones I'd noticed earlier, but fresh wildflowers. Dozens of them, arranged in a perfect circle around the base of a big oak tree. Mountain laurel, wild roses, black-eyed Susans, flowers that shouldn't bloom at the same time, all picked and placed with care. In the center of the circle sat 3 small objects. I stepped closer, my heart hammering. They were toys, old ones, the kind kids might have played with decades ago. A wooden doll with a painted face, a small tin cup, and a child's shoe, so tiny it could only have belonged to a toddler. The leather was cracked and faded, but these things looked like they'd been placed here recently. There was no dirt on them, no signs of weather damage. "Hello?" I called out, louder this time. "Is someone there? Are you hurt?" The forest stayed quiet. Too quiet. I realized I hadn't heard a single bird or insect since I'd started climbing. Even the wind had stopped. I pulled out my camera and took pictures of the flower circle and the toys. Whatever was going on here, I needed to document it. But as I looked at the photos on my camera's tiny screen, my blood went cold. The toys weren't there. I looked up from the camera. The flower circle was still there, but the center was empty. Just bare dirt where the toys had been sitting a second ago. I checked the photo again. Nothing but an empty circle of flowers. My hands started shaking. I'd seen those toys. I knew I had. They'd been right there, real as anything. A branch snapped behind me. I spun around, but there was nothing, just trees and shadows and the empty trail stretching down the mountain. "This is Ranger Thornfield," I said into my radio, even though I knew it wouldn't work. "I'm investigating a possible missing person on Spruce Mountain. If anyone can hear this." Static filled the air, but underneath it, I could swear I heard something else. A whisper, too faint to make out the words. I clicked off the radio and kept climbing. The fire tower came into view about 20 minutes later. It looked different than I remembered, older somehow, more weathered. The wooden stairs that led up to the cabin looked safe enough, but something about the whole structure felt wrong. At the base of the tower, I found more evidence that someone had been here recently. The grass was trampled down in places, and there were marks in the dirt that might have been footprints. But they were strange, too small for an adult, more like a child's feet. I called out again. "Hello! This is the Park Service. If you need help, please answer." This time something answered back. "Help them? Help my babies." The voice came from above me, from the cabin at the top of the fire tower. It was clearer now, and I could hear the desperation in it. A woman crying, begging for help. I grabbed the wooden railing and started climbing. The stairs creaked under my weight, and a few of the boards felt soft with rot, but they held. Halfway up, I stopped. There was someone in the cabin. I could see a shadow moving past the windows, back and forth like someone pacing. The voice came again, muffled by the walls, but still clear enough to understand. "My babies. Where are my babies?" I climbed faster. Whatever was wrong with this woman, she needed help. Maybe she was confused, maybe she'd hit her head and was having some kind of breakdown. People did strange things when they were hurt or scared. I reached the top of the tower and peered through the cabin door. It was empty. Not just empty of people, empty of everything. No furniture, no equipment, just bare wooden walls and a floor covered in decades of dust and dead leaves. But I'd seen someone moving around in here just minutes ago. I stepped inside, my boots echoing in the small space. The windows were cloudy with age and dirt, but I could see out across the mountains. It was a beautiful view, the kind of place someone might come to think or find peace. "Hello?" I called softly. "Ma'am, I'm here to help you." The temperature in the cabin dropped suddenly. My breath started fogging, and I could see it in the dusty air. Outside it wowed as a warm spring day, but in here it felt like winter. On the floor in front of me, words appeared in the dust, not written by a hand or stick, but forming themselves letter by letter, like an invisible finger was tracing them out. "Help them." I stumbled backward, hitting the wall. This wasn't possible. This wasn't real. But as I watched, more words formed. "Find my babies." The temperature kept dropping. Ice started forming on the inside of the windows, and my breath came out in thick white clouds. A sound came from below me. Footsteps on the wooden stairs, slow and heavy. Someone was climbing the tower. I pressed myself against the cabin wall and listened. The footsteps were getting closer, but they didn't sound right. Too slow, too deliberate. And between each step, I could hear something else. A soft crying sound, like someone trying not to sob too loudly. The footsteps stopped just outside the cabin door. "Please," came the voice, so close now I could feel the words more than hear them. "Please help me find them." I forced myself to speak. "Ma'am, I'm here to help. Are you hurt? Are you lost?" Silence. Then the door, which I'd left open, slowly swung shut. I was trapped in the cabin with whatever this was. The temperature had dropped so low I could barely feel my fingers. Ice covered the windows completely now, blocking out the sunlight. In the darkness, I heard movement. Not footsteps, more like fabric rustling, like someone in a long dress walking across the wooden floor. "My babies," the voice whispered, so close to my ear I should have felt breath on my neck. "They took my babies away from me." I fumbled for my flashlight with numb fingers and clicked it on. The beam cut through the darkness, but there was nobody there. Just me, alone in an empty cabin. But in the dust on the floor, more words were appearing. Martha Dillard, 1923. They wouldn't undersong. Stand. My grandmother's stories came flooding back. Martha Dillard, the woman who lived up on Spruce Mountain with her 3 children. The woman who did something terrible when times got hard. The flashlight beam started flickering. The battery was new, but the cold was draining it fast. In the dying light, I saw something that made my heart stop. There was someone else in the cabin. A woman in an old-fashioned white dress, standing in the corner where my light couldn't quite reach. Her hair was long and dark, hanging down over her face. She was holding something against her chest, something small and bundle-shaped. "I saved them," she whispered, and now I could see her lips moving even though I couldn't make out her face. "I saved them from the hunger, from the cold. They're safe now." The flashlight went out completely. In the darkness, I heard her move closer. The temperature was so cold now that frost was forming on my jacket. "You understand, don't you?" Her voice was right in front of me now. A mother has to protect her children. I tried to back away, but I was already against the wall. In the pitch-black cabin, I could hear her breathing, slow, raspy breaths that didn't sound quite human. "They took them away from me," she continued. "Buried them somewhere I can't find them, but I can hear them crying at night. They're scared, alone in the dark. They need their mama." My flashlight flickered back to life for just a moment, and in that brief flash of light, I saw her face. It was pale, almost gray, with dark circles under her eyes. But the worst part was her expression, the look of a mother who'd lost everything and would do anything to get it back. "Help me find them," she said, reaching out with one thin, cold hand. "Help me bring my babies home." The light died again, and her hand touched my arm. It felt like ice. Worse than ice, like something that had been buried in frozen ground for decades. But along with the cold came something else. Images flashing through my mind that weren't my own memories. I saw the cabin as it used to be, furnished with simple mountain furniture. I saw 3 children, 2 boys and a girl, all under 10 years old. I saw a young woman who looked like the ghost, but with color in her cheeks and life in her eyes. I saw the winter of 1923 when the snow wouldn't stop and the food ran out. I saw Martha Dillard mixing something into a pot of soup while her hungry children waited at the table. "No," I gasped, jerking my arm away from her touch. But the visions kept coming. I saw the children getting sleepy after dinner. I saw Martha crying as she carried them to their beds. I saw her walking out into the snow that night, heading for the old mine shaft about a mile from here. "I saved them," Martha's voice echoed in my head. "I saved them from suffering." The cabin door flew open, letting in warm spring air and sunlight. The ghost was gone, but her words still echoed in my mind. I stumbled out onto the platform, gasping and shivering. My radio crackled to life. "Becca? Becca, come in. This is Tom at the station." I grabbed it with shaking hands. "Tom, I'm here. I'm at the fire tower." "Thank God. We got another call about that screaming woman. A whole family heard it this time, coming from the old mining area. Are you okay up there?" The old mining area, where Martha had taken her children that night in 1923. "Tom," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "I need you to look up something for me. Martha Dillard, 1923, should be in the old county records." "What's this about, Becca?" "Just, please. And send back up to the fire tower. I might need help." As I climbed down from the tower, I tried to make sense of what I'd experienced. My grandmother always said some people who died with unfinished business couldn't rest. But Martha Dillard had murdered her children. Why would she be trying to find them now? Unless she really believed she'd saved them. Unless in her mind, twisted by desperation and grief, she thought she was protecting them. My radio crackled again. This was Tom's voice, was grim. "Becca, I found that information. Martha Dillard, age 26, found dead in 1923 in an old mine shaft. Apparent suicide. Her 3 children, Robert, age 9, Mary, age 7, and little Thomas, age 4, were found a week later. They'd been... Jesus, Becca. They'd been poisoned. What happened to the children? I asked, even though I already knew the answer would be bad. Bodies were never recovered properly. The mine shaft collapsed during the search. They're still down there somewhere. I stopped walking. That's what Martha meant when she said they'd taken her babies away from her. She couldn't find them because their bodies were buried under tons of rock and dirt, somewhere in the old mining tunnels, and she'd been searching for them ever since. I followed the old mining road toward the abandoned shaft. It was really just a trail now, overgrown with bushes and small trees, but I could still see where it cut through the forest. My grandmother had brought me this way once when I was little to show me where the old-timers used to dig for coal. Never go in there alone, she'd told me. The mountain don't like being hollowed out. It gets angry. I'd thought she meant cave-ins and bad air. Now I wondered if she knew about Martha. The screaming started again as I got closer to the mine entrance. But it was different now. Not just cries for help, but actual words, clear as day. "Robert! Mary! Thomas! Where are you, babies? Mama's here!" I could see the mine opening ahead of me, a dark hole in the side of the mountain with old wooden supports that looked ready to collapse. Warning signs from the Park Service were posted all around it, telling people to stay out. But the voice was coming from inside. I called Tom on the radio. "I'm at the old Dillard mine. The voice is coming from inside." "Absolutely not, Becca. You wait for backup. That place isn't safe." "Tom, there might be someone trapped down there. Or there might not be. You wait." But as I stood there looking at the mine entrance, the crying got louder, more desperate. And underneath Martha's voice, I heard something else. Smaller voices, weaker ones. Children crying. I couldn't wait for backup. Not if there were kids in trouble down there. I clicked on my flashlight and stepped into the mine. The air was cold and damp, smelling of old wood and stagnant water. The tunnel went back into the mountain further than my light could reach. Old railroad tracks ran along the floor, rusty and broken. "Hello?" I called out. "This is the Park Service. If anyone's down here, please answer." The crying stopped. But in the silence, I could hear something else. Footsteps echoing from deeper in the mine. Slow, shuffling steps like someone walking carefully in the dark. I followed the sound, stepping carefully around loose rocks and rotted wooden beams. The tunnel branched off in several directions, but the footsteps always seemed to be coming from straight ahead. About 50 yards into the mountain, I found the collapse Tom had mentioned. A wall of rock and dirt blocked the main tunnel with just a small gap at the top where someone might be able to squeeze through. The footsteps had stopped, but now I could hear breathing coming from the other side of the collapse. "Ma'am, are you hurt?" I called out. "Can you hear me?" "Help them," came Martha's voice, muffled by the tons of rock between us. "Please, help them get home." I examined the gap in the collapse. It was barely big enough for a person to crawl through, and the rocks looked unstable. But if someone was trapped on the other side... Against every rule of mine safety I'd ever learned, I squeezed through the gap. On the other side was a larger chamber, probably where the miners had dug out a big vein of coal. My flashlight beam swept across the space, showing old equipment and other things. In the center of the chamber, 3 small skeletons sat in a circle, still wearing the rotted remains of 1920s children's clothes. Their bones were clean and white, arranged carefully like someone had been taking care of them. And standing over them was Martha Dillard. She looked more solid now, more real. I could see the details of her face, young, pretty, but worn down by hardship and grief. Her white dress was stained with dirt and something that might have been blood. In her arms, she held what looked like a bundle of old cloth. "You came," she said, and her voice sounded almost normal now, almost human. I knew someone would understand. A mother always knows. I kept my flashlight trained on her, trying not to look at the small bones. "Martha, those are your children." "Yes," she said, sitting down next to the skeletons. "My babies. I brought them here to keep them safe, but then the mountain fell down and I couldn't get back to them. They've been alone for so long." She reached out and touched one of the skulls gently. like she was stroking a sleeping child's hair. "They need a proper burial," I said carefully. "They need to rest." Martha looked up at me with eyes that held decades of pain. "Will you help me take them home? Will you help me put them somewhere safe?" I thought about what my grandmother had taught me about mountain spirits and unquiet dead, about how some ghosts couldn't rest until their unfinished business was complete. "Yes," I said, "I'll help you." But as I spoke, I realized the truth. Martha wasn't just a ghost looking for her children. She was a mother who'd murdered 3 innocent kids and then spent almost a century refusing to face what she'd done. She'd convinced herself she was protecting them, but really she was just protecting herself from the guilt. The children's spirits weren't here. They'd moved on long ago, probably the moment they died. Only Martha remained, trapped by her own refusal to accept responsibility. "But first," I said, "you have to tell me the truth about what really happened that night." Martha's expression changed. The sad mother mask slipped away, and underneath was something darker. "I saved them," she hissed. "I saved them from hunger, from cold, from growing up poor and forgotten in these mountains." "You murdered them." The temperature in the chamber dropped 20 degrees in an instant. Martha stood up, and she looked different now. Taller, more terrible. The bundle in her arms wasn't cloth. It was a 4th skeleton, tiny, like a baby's. "You don't understand," she said, and her voice echoed strangely off the rock walls. "You don't have children. You don't know what it's like to watch them suffer." Ice started forming on the walls. My flashlight flickered. "They're not suffering anymore, Martha. They haven't been suffering for 70 years. You're the only one who can't let go." Martha screamed then, not the cry for help I'd been hearing all day, but a sound of pure rage and grief that echoed through the mine like thunder. The rocks above us groaned and shifted. The mine started shaking. Dust and small rocks rained down from the ceiling as Martha's scream echoed through the tunnels. I had to get out of there before the whole place came down, but I couldn't leave those children's bones. "Martha," I said, trying to keep my voice calm even as the mountain trembled around us. "Help me carry them out. Help me give them the burial they deserve." For a moment, the screaming stopped. Martha looked at me with confusion, like she was waking up from a long nightmare. You'll help them rest. I promise." The shaking slowed, then stopped. Martha knelt down next to the 3 skeletons and began gathering the small bones with incredible gentleness. I helped her, wrapping the remains in my emergency blanket. We crawled back through the gap in the collapse, Martha somehow able to touch and carry things now that she had a purpose. The baby skeleton, her fortis, child that the records had never mentioned, she carried herself. Outside the mine, the sun was setting. My backup had arrived. Tom and 2 other rangers were waiting by their vehicles, looking worried sick. "Becca!" Tom called out. "What the hell are you doing in there?" "I found them," I said, carrying my bundle of bones. "Martha Dillard's children. They need a proper burial." I looked back toward the mine entrance, but Martha was gone. Just a whisper in the wind that might have been, "Thank you." The next week was a whirlwind of paperwork, meetings with the county coroner and arrangements with local churches. We buried the 4 Dillard children in the old mountain cemetery with a proper headstone that listed their names and ages. I was the only one at the funeral besides the preacher, but I swear I felt Martha there too, saying goodbye at last. The strange incidents on Spruce Mountain stopped after that. Hikers reported normal wildlife sounds again. My radio worked fine on the mountain. The fire tower felt like just an old building instead of a place where time stood still. But I learned something important from Martha Dillard's ghost. The mountains do remember everything. Like my grandmother always said, they remember the good times and the bad times, the love and the loss, the guilt and the grief. And sometimes they need help letting go. I kept working as a ranger, but I also started studying the old mountain stories more seriously, learning about the plants and herbs my grandmother had taught me, the old ways of dealing with spirits that couldn't rest. Because Martha wasn't the only ghost in these mountains. She was just the loudest one. 6 months later, I got another call about strange voices in the woods. This time, I was ready. After all, someone has to help the dead find peace. And in these old mountains, that someone might as well be me. My name is Rebecca Thornfield, and I'm the first female park ranger in this district. But more than that, I'm a bridge between the old ways and the new, between the living and the dead. And the mountains still remember everything. My name is Samuel Crow Feather, and I've been a park ranger in the Great Smoky Mountains for 8 years now. Most folks just call me Sam. I'm what you might call mixed heritage, Cherokee on my mother's side, Scottish on my father's. Growing up, that always made me feel like I was stuck between two worlds, never quite fitting into either one. I specialized in water rescue because I knew every stream, creek, and waterfall in these mountains like the back of my hand. Been swimming in them since I was old enough to walk. My grandmother used to tell me stories about the old Cherokee ways, about spirits in the water and medicine women who could heal with touch. I always figured that was just old superstition, the kind of thing that kept our people stuck in the past instead of moving forward. That was before Cataract Falls changed everything I thought I knew. It was early May 2024, right at the start of spring flood season. The snowmelt from up high was making all the creeks run fast and dangerous. Cataract Falls sits in a remote hollow about 6 miles off the main trail, a 200-foot cascade that drops into a deep, dark pool. The mist from the falls creates this weird twilight effect even in the middle of the day. Your cell phone won't work back there. Too much rock between you and the towers. I'd always felt something strange about that place, even as a kid. The air felt heavier somehow. Animals stayed away from the pool at the bottom. But I never put much stock in feelings. I believed in facts, in science, in what I could see and touch and measure. The call came in around 3 in the afternoon. A hiking group had found a body in the pool below Cataract Falls. They were pretty shaken up about it, said the woman looked like she'd been in the water for days, but they'd seen her walking the trail that very morning. I grabbed my rescue gear and headed out. The trail to Cataract Falls is treacherous on a good day. Narrow switchbacks carved into the mountainside, loose rocks that'll send you tumbling if you're not careful. The closer I got, the more the mist thickened around me. By the time I could hear the roar of the falls, I could barely see 10 feet ahead. The hiking group was huddled together near the tree line, looking pale and scared. They pointed toward the pool and backed away, like they didn't want to get any closer than they had to. "She's down there," one of them said. "But something ain't right about it. She's facing upstream like she was trying to swim against the current." I'd seen plenty of drowning victims over the years. Water does strange things to bodies, moves them in ways that don't always make sense. But when I looked down into that dark pool, even I had to admit, something felt wrong. The woman was floating face down about 20 feet from the falls. Her long black hair spread out around her head like ink in water. She wore a white dress that billowed around her in the current. But here's what bothered me. The current in that pool always flows counterclockwise, toward the outlet stream. This woman was positioned like she'd been swimming directly into the falls against everything the water should have done to her. And there was something else. The water around her looked darker somehow, not just from her hair, but like the water itself had turned a different color. I radioed for backup and got ready to go in after her. That's when I noticed my equipment acting up. My underwater flashlight kept flickering. The depth gauge on my diving gear showed impossible readings, spinning from 0 to 60 feet and back again. Even my rope felt strange in my hands, like it was vibrating with some kind of energy. But I had a job to do. A woman was dead, and her family would want answers. I wasn't going to let some superstitious nonsense stop me from doing my job. Looking back now, I wish I'd listened to that voice in the back of my head telling me to walk away. I wish I'd paid attention to the way the mist seemed to whisper in words I almost understood, or how the water at the base of the falls had turned the color of rust. Instead, I checked my gear one more time and stepped into the pool. The water was so cold it took my breath away, even through my wetsuit. And as I waded deeper, I could swear I heard someone calling my name from behind the waterfall. But that was impossible. Nobody else was supposed to be back there. The water got colder the deeper I went, which made no sense. Spring runoff is cold, sure, but this felt like ice water in the middle of summer. My breath came out in little puffs, and I could see frost forming on my mask. When I reached the body, the first thing I noticed was her face. She looked peaceful, almost like she was sleeping. Her skin was pale, but not bloated like you'd expect after days in the water. No fish bites, no decomposition. She could have just laid down for a nap 5 minutes ago. But her eyes were open, staring right up at the waterfall, and they were completely black. Not just the pupils, but the whole eye, like someone had filled them with ink. I tried to lift her, to get her to shore, but she was impossibly heavy. It was like she was anchored to something at the bottom of the pool. When I dove down to check, the water got so murky I couldn't see my own hands. My equipment went crazy. The compass spun like a top. The depth gauge showed I was somehow 200 feet underwater in a pool that couldn't be more than 30 feet deep. That's when I heard the voice. It came from everywhere and nowhere at once, speaking words that sounded familiar but made no sense. Cherokee words, I realized, though I'd never learned the language. My grandmother had tried to teach me when I was little, but I'd been too stubborn, too sure that old ways had no place in the modern world. Now, somehow, I understood every word. Gadohi, Gadohi, come, home. The voice was calling me by my Cherokee name, the one my grandmother used when I was small. A name I'd never told anyone at the ranger station. I surfaced fast, probably too fast, my ears popping from the pressure change. The hiking group was gone. I could see them way up the trail, moving as quickly as they could manage. Smart of them. But I wasn't alone. Standing at the edge of the pool was a woman in traditional Cherokee dress. Not like the tourist stuff you see at the gift shops, but the real thing. Doeskin, decorated with shells and beads, her long black hair braided with feathers and ribbons. She was maybe 40 years old, beautiful in a way that made your chest tight just looking at her. She was also completely transparent. I could see the trees right through her body. I blinked hard, figuring the cold water and weird equipment readings had messed with my head. But when I opened my eyes, she was still there, still staring at me with eyes that held too much sadness and too much rage. "You look like him," she said, and her voice was the same one I'd heard underwater. "You have his face, his hands, but do you have his courage?" "Lady, I don't know what you're talking about," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm here on official business. There's been an accident." She laughed, and the sound made the hair on my arms stand up. "Accident? Is that what they're calling murder these days?" The woman in the water, the body I'd been trying to recover, suddenly jerked upright. Not like she was alive, but like someone had yanked her up by invisible strings. Her head turned toward me with a wet, grinding sound, and those black eyes focused right on my face. "They threw me in the water to see if I would float," she said, even though her mouth didn't move. The voice came from the transparent woman on the shore. "They said if I was innocent, the spirits would save me. If I was guilty, I would drown." The body in the water started moving toward me, not swimming, but gliding across the surface like she was on ice instead of water. I backpedaled as fast as I could, but the pool suddenly felt huge, like I was swimming in an ocean instead of a mountain pool. "I drowned," the transparent woman continued, "but not because I was guilty. I drowned because they tied stones to my feet and pushed me off the cliff. I drowned because I helped people they thought were enemies. I drowned because they were afraid of what I could do." The floating body was close enough now that I could see details I'd missed before. Her wrists were raw and bloody, like rope burns. Her ankles, too. And around her neck was a leather cord with something heavy hanging from it. Not jewelry, but a stone, carved with symbols I recognized from my grandmother's old stories. "My name is Ayanna Crow Feather," the transparent woman said. "And you, Gadohi, are my great-great-grandson." That's when the body in the water reached for me with hands that moved like claws, and I understood that everything my grandmother had tried to teach me about the old ways, about spirits and medicine and the power that runs in the blood, all of it was real, and all of it was very, very angry. I thrashed backward through the water, my training kicking in, even though my brain was screaming that this couldn't be happening. The body, Ayana, my ancestor, whatever she was, moved through the water like it was air, her arms reaching for me with fingers that stretched longer than human fingers should. "Don't run from me, Gadohi," she said without moving her lips. "I've been waiting so long for family to come home." I made it to shore and scrambled up the muddy bank, my gear weighing me down. Behind me I could hear splashing, but not like someone swimming, more like something large moving through shallow water, something that didn't need to breathe. The transparent woman, the real Ayana, I guessed, stood watching me with those sad, angry eyes. "You can see me," she said. "That means the blood is strong in you, stronger than it was in your father or his father. They couldn't see me at all." "My father never came here," I gasped, checking my equipment. Nothing was working right. The radio just hissed static. My GPS showed I was somehow in 3 different locations at once. "They all came here eventually," she said. "Every generation, someone with crow feather blood finds their way to my pool. Some see me, some don't. The ones who can see me, I let live. The ones who can't." She gestured toward the water. That's when I realized the truth. 7 drownings in 10 years, all at the same spot. All ruled accidental because there was never any evidence of foul play. But what if they weren't accidents? What if they were executions? "You're killing people," I said. "I'm collecting what's owed," she corrected. 200 years ago, they drowned me for helping Cherokee who married whites, for healing children who had mixed blood like yours. They said I was a witch, that I was poisoning the tribe with my sympathy for outsiders." The body in the pool had gone still, floating face down again like when I'd first arrived. But I could feel it watching me, waiting. The families who accused me, who testified against me, who watched me drown, their descendants still come to these mountains. They hike these trails, swim in these pools, never knowing what their ancestors did. I make sure they remember. "That was 200 years ago," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "These people had nothing to do with what happened to you." "The blood remembers," she said. "Even when the mind forgets, the blood remembers. Just like your blood remembers me, even though no one ever told you my story." She was right. Standing there, looking at her, I felt memories that weren't mine stirring in my head. Images of this place from long ago. Cherokee families got. There'd around fires, children playing in the stream, women washing clothes on the rocks. And then other images, darker ones. A trial by the water's edge. Accusations. Fear. And finally, a woman with my eyes and my chin being pushed off the cliff with stones tied to her feet. "I was innocent," Ayana said. "But guilt and innocence don't matter when people are afraid. They needed someone to blame for the troubles that came with the white settlers. Someone to punish for the changes they couldn't stop. I was convenient." More memories flooded through me, not just of her death, but of what came after. Years of rage building up in the dark water. Decades of waiting for justice that never came. Generations of crow-feathered descendants who forgot their own history, who chose the white world over the Cherokee world, who turned their backs on the old ways until they couldn't even see their own ancestors' ghost. "But you can see me," she said again. "You have the gift I had, the ability to speak with spirits, to heal with your hands, to see the connections between all living things. Your grandmother tried to teach you, didn't she?" I nodded, remembering. Grandmother mixing herbs, singing in Cherokee, trying to show me how to feel the energy that flowed through everything. I'd thought it was nonsense, embarrassing superstition that kept us stuck in the past. "She knew," Ayana said. "She could see me too when she was young. But she was afraid to come here, afraid of what she might learn. She died with my story locked in her heart. And now there's only you." The water behind me started bubbling like it was boiling, though it was still ice cold. The body rose up again, standing waist deep in the pool. This time, when it spoke, the voice came from its own throat. "7 families," it said in a voice like grinding stone. 7 bloodlines that owe me justice. I've taken 6. Only 1 remains." "What family?" I asked. though I was starting to suspect I didn't want to know. Morrison, Ayanna said. The family that led my trial, that convinced the others I was dangerous. As their descendant is coming here tomorrow, a young woman with her children, here to hike the falls and enjoy the beautiful spring weather. I felt my blood turn to ice water. I knew exactly who she was talking about. Sarah Morrison, 28 years old, with 2 little kids and a husband who worked too much. She'd called the ranger station yesterday to ask about trail conditions. She wanted to bring her family somewhere special, somewhere they could make memories. She's innocent, I said. Her kids are innocent. Were my children innocent? The body in the water asked. And now I could see them in my mind. 2 young ones who watched their mother dragged away to die, who grew up without her guidance, who learned to hide their Cherokee blood to survive in a world that hated them. I won't let you hurt them, I said. Both versions of Ayanna, the transparent one and the body in the water, smiled at the same time. It was not a pleasant expression. Then you'll have to stop me, they said in unison. But first, you'll have to understand what you really are. The body in the water raised one hand, fingers pointing at my chest. Power hit me like lightning, dropping me to my knees. But it wasn't painful. It was awakening. Every cell in my body suddenly remembered what it meant to be Cherokee, what it meant to carry the blood of medicine people and water keepers and those who spoke with spirits. I could see everything, the connections between all living things, the flow of energy through the mountain, the way the water carried memory and pain and power. And I could see the rage that had poisoned this sacred place, the injustice that had turned healing water into a trap for the innocent. Now you know, Ayanna said. Now you understand what they took from you when they made you ashamed of what you are. The question is, what are you going to do about it? The power flows. Owing through me was like nothing I'd ever felt, like being plugged into the mountain itself. I could sense every living thing for miles around, the trees, the animals, the water, the very stones under my feet. All of it connected, all of it alive in ways I'd never imagined. But I could also feel the poison. 200 years of rage and pain had corrupted this place, turned it from a sacred site into a killing ground. The water that should have been healing was now hungry for blood. The spirit that should have been at peace was trapped in an endless cycle of revenge. You feel it now, Ayanna said. The power that runs in your blood. The gift that made me dangerous to those who feared change. I struggled to my feet, trying to make sense of what was happening to me. This isn't just about revenge, is it? There's something else. She nodded, and for the first time, some of the anger left her face. I was a bridge builder, Gadohi. I helped Cherokee adapt to the new world without losing who they were. I healed white children when their own medicine failed. I showed people that mixed blood wasn't a weakness, it was strength. And they killed you for it. They killed me because I threatened their simple answers. Cherokee good, white bad. That was easier to understand than the truth, which is that people are just people, and what matters is what you do with your life, not what blood runs in your veins. The body in the water moved closer to shore. When it spoke, its voice was softer now, more human. But the rage, the rage was so much easier than the grief. Anger kept me strong. Anger kept me here. Grief would have meant accepting what was lost forever. I looked at both versions of my ancestor, the sad, transparent woman who remembered who she'd been in life, and the dark, vengeful thing she'd become in death. You're split, I realized. Part of you wants peace, but part of you can't let go. The Morrison woman comes tomorrow, the body said, and its voice was getting rougher again, more like grinding stone. With her children, perfect ages too, to learn about consequences. I won't let you hurt them, I said again. Then heal me, both versions of Ayanna said at once. You have the gift, you have the power. Do what I couldn't do for myself. Make me whole. I stared at them, understanding flooding through me. You want me to choose. Save the Morrison family by helping you find peace, or let you kill them and continue this cycle forever. Choose what you are, the transparent Ayanna said. Cherokee medicine keeper, or white man's park ranger. Old ways or new ways, you can't be both forever. But she was wrong. That was the whole point, wasn't it? I didn't have to choose. Mixed blood wasn't a weakness. It was strength, just like she'd tried to show people 2 centuries ago. I waded back into the pool toward the body floating there. The water was still ice cold, but now I could feel the life in it too, the memory of what it used to be before rage poisoned it. Sacred water, healing water, water that connected the Cherokee people to the spirit world. "What are you doing?" the vengeful version asked. "What you taught me to do," I said. "What you died trying to teach everyone. I'm being both things at once." I reached the floating body and took its cold hands in mine. The moment we touched, I felt everything. Her life, her death, her long years of rage and pain. But I also felt something else. Deep under all that anger was a well of love so deep it took my breath away. Love for her people, love for her children, love for the Cherokee way of life that was disappearing. Love even for the people who had killed her, because she understood their fear even if she couldn't forgive their actions. "I'm sorry," I whispered. And I meant it. Not just sorry for what happened to her, but sorry for all the crow-feather descendants who had forgotten her story. Sorry for choosing the white world over the Cherokee world. Sorry for being ashamed of what I was. "I'm sorry too," she whispered back. And this time the voice came from both versions at once. Sorry for letting rage poison what should have been healing. Sorry for making innocent people pay for old crimes. Sorry for becoming the very thing they accused me of being. The power flowed between us, not the destructive force she'd been using to kill, but the healing energy she'd used in life to help people. I felt her memories becoming my memories, her knowledge becoming my knowledge. The old Cherokee ways, the ceremonies and songs and healing practices that had been lost for generations. But I also felt her accepting something else, that the modern world wasn't all bad, that park rangers like me were just another kind of caretaker, that protecting the mountains and keeping people safe was its own form of medicine work. "Both," she said and smiled. "Cherokee and Scottish. Old ways and new ways. Medicine keeper and park ranger." "You're right, Gadohi. It doesn't have to be one or the other." The vengeful body began to dissolve, not disappearing but merging with the transparent spirit, becoming whole again. The water around us grew warmer, clearer. I could feel the rage leaving the pool like poison being drawn from a wound. "The Morrison family?" I asked. "We'll be safe," she said. "All families will be safe now. This is a place of healing again, not a trap for the innocent." She was fading now, becoming more transparent, but her face was peaceful in a way it hadn't been before. "Take care of this place, Gadohi. Remember the stories. Teach others what it means to be a bridge between worlds." "I will," I promised. She nodded once, then looked up at the waterfall with eyes that held wonder instead of rage. "It's beautiful," she said. I'd forgotten how beautiful it was. Then she was gone, leaving me alone in water that ran clear and clean for the first time in 200 years. I made it back to the ranger station just after sunset, my gear dripping and my mind still reeling from everything that had happened. The other rangers took one look at me and figured I'd had a rough day on the water. They weren't wrong, just not in the way they thought. I filed my report the next morning. Accidental drowning, body recovered, no signs of foul play. The victim was identified as Maria Santos, a tourist from Florida who'd been hiking alone. She'd slipped on the wet rocks and fallen into the pool. Tragic, but not uncommon, especially during spring flood season. Nobody asked about the strange equipment malfunctions or the impossible water temperature readings. Nobody questioned why a drowning victim showed no signs of actually drowning. The official story was clean and simple, the kind that doesn't raise uncomfortable questions or require supernatural explanations. But I knew the truth. Maria Santos had been the descendant of one of the families that condemned Ayana to death. She'd come to the falls for a peaceful hike and paid the price for her ancestors' fears. She was the 7th and final victim of a 200-year cycle of revenge. The Morrison family came the next day, just like they'd planned. Sarah Morrison and her 2 kids, ages 6 and 9, excited to see the famous waterfall they'd heard so much about. I gave them the standard safety briefing, but I stayed close while they explored the pool, just in case. Nothing happened. The kids splashed and played in water that was the perfect temperature for swimming. Sarah took pictures of the falls cascading down into clear, clean water that reflected the sky like a mirror. They had a wonderful time and went home with memories that would last a lifetime. That night, I called my grandmother's sister, the only elder in my family still alive. I told her I wanted to learn Cherokee, that I was ready to hear the old stories and understand the old ways. She cried when I said it, told me she'd been waiting her whole life for one of the young ones to sue, home back to the family traditions. Over the following months, I started changing how I did my job. I learned the Cherokee names for all the mountains and streams in my territory. I studied the history of each place, not just the official Park Service version, but the real history, the Cherokee version. I began to understand which sites were sacred and why, which places needed special protection and respect. I also started noticing things I'd never seen before. Other spirits, other places where old injustices had left scars on the land. Not all of them were as angry as Ayanna had been, but all of them were waiting for someone to acknowledge their stories, to remember what had been forgotten. Some were Cherokee spirits, but not all. I found the ghost of a Civil War soldier still guarding a bridge that no longer existed. I discovered the spirit of a young woman who died in a mining accident in 1943, still warning people away from unstable ground. I even met the playful ghost of a park ranger from the 1960s who died trying to rescue a lost hiker. All of them just wanted to be remembered. All of them had something to teach about taking care of the mountains and the people who came to visit them. I started keeping a journal of these encounters, documenting not just where they happened, but what I learned from each spirit. It became a different kind of park ranger manual, a guide to the supernatural history of the Smokies, written for whoever comes after me. Because I know now that I'm not the only one with this gift. There are others out there, other people with mixed heritage who can see between worlds, other bridge builders who can help heal old wounds and prevent new ones. The blood remembers, just like Ayanna said, and when it's time, the blood will call them home too. The waterfall at Cataract Falls runs clear and clean now. The water is perfect for swimming, and the mist creates rainbows in the afternoon sun. Families come there to make memories, and children play safely in the pool where my ancestor once drowned. But sometimes, when the light is just right and the mist catches the sun at the perfect angle, you can see her standing at the edge of the pool, not angry anymore, not vengeful, but watchful, protecting the place that was once her prison, making sure it stays a place of healing instead of harm. She nods when she sees me, acknowledging the work we do together. The Cherokee medicine woman and the mixed-blood park ranger, the old ways and the new ways, all of it connected like she tried to teach people so long ago. My name is Samuel Crowfeather, and I'm a bridge between worlds. And I finally understand that's not something to be ashamed of. It's something to be proud of. The mountains are full of stories. Some of them are written in history books, and some of them are written in the water and the wind and the stones themselves. My job is to listen to all of them, to remember all of them, and to make sure that the people who come after me know the truth about what happened in these hills. Because the blood remembers, even when the mind forgets. And sometimes, that's the only justice the dead will ever get. My name is David Wolfbane, but everyone calls me Dave. I've been a park ranger for 18 years now, and I've seen just about everything these mountains can throw at you. Bears, lost hikers, drug runners using old moonshine caves. You name it, I've dealt with it. But nothing, and I mean nothing, prepared me for what happened at Raven's Peak that winter. It was February 12th, 1984, when the call came in. I was sitting in my cabin drinking coffee and going through paperwork. The radio crackled to life around 3 p.m. "Dave, we got a hiker up near Raven's Peak who found something weird in one of the caves," dispatch said. "Claims there's human bones all over the place." I sighed and reached for my coat. Probably just old bones from some Civil War skirmish or maybe a forgotten cemetery. These mountains are full of history, most of it buried and forgotten. "I'm on my way," I radioed back. The drive up the mountain took 40 minutes in my truck. Snow was falling hard, big flakes that stuck to everything. By the time I reached the trailhead, there was already 3 inches of fresh powder on the ground. The wind was picking up too, making that whistling sound through the trees that always put me on edge. I grabbed my pack, flashlight, camera, evidence bags, first aid kit. After 12 years as military police before becoming a ranger, I knew how to handle crime scenes. Though honestly, I figured this would just be another false alarm. The hiker who'd called it in was waiting by his car, a young guy maybe 25 years old. His name was Tommy Chen, and he was shaking. Not from cold either. This was pure fear shaking. "Thank God you're here," he said. "I can't get what I saw out of my head." "Calm down, son. Show me what you found." Tommy led me up a narrow trail I'd walked hundreds of times before. But today, something felt different. The woods were too quiet. No birds sounds. No squirrels chattering. Even the wind seemed muffled, like the mountain itself was holding its breath. After 20 minutes of hiking, Tommy stopped and pointed to a dark opening in the rock face. "In there," he whispered. I was looking for shelter from the snow when I found it. The cave mouth was maybe 6 feet high and 4 feet wide. I'd never noticed it before, which was strange because I knew every inch of this mountain. I pulled out my flashlight and clicked it on. "You stay here," I told Tommy. "If something happens, hike back to your car and call for help." The moment I stepped inside, I knew something was wrong. The air was warm. Not just warmer than outside, but actually warm, like someone had been running a heater. That didn't make sense. Caves stay cool year-round. My flashlight beam swept across the cave floor and I stopped dead. Bones, lots of them, arranged in perfect circles and spirals like someone had spent hours organizing them. Skulls in the center, leg bones radiating outward like spokes of a wheel. Rib cages stacked like cordwood along the walls. I'd seen plenty of crime scenes in my day, but this was different. These weren't just dumped bodies. Someone had taken time with this. Care, even. The bones were clean, bleached white, and positioned with almost artistic precision. I pulled out my camera and started taking pictures. The flash seemed too bright in the darkness, creating harsh shadows that made the bone patterns look like they were moving, which they weren't, of course. Just a trick of the light. But when I knelt down to examine one of the skulls, my blood went cold. The bone showed clear trauma marks, deep gouges that looked like claw marks. And the skull was small. Too small. A child's skull. I moved deeper into the cave, my heart pounding. More bone arrangements, each one more elaborate than the last. Femurs crossed like swords, vertebrae stacked in perfect towers, and in the very back of the cave, the centerpiece. A throne made entirely of human skulls, each one facing outward like they were watching. My flashlight started to flicker. I tapped it, but the beam kept getting weaker. The batteries were fresh that morning, but now they were dying fast. Too fast. That's when I heard it. A soft clicking sound, like dice being rolled. It was coming from deeper in the cave, from passages I hadn't explored yet. Click, click, click. Rhythmic, almost musical. I should have left right then. Any sensible person would have. But 18 years of ranger work had taught me that every mystery has an explanation. Someone was playing games, maybe trying to scare hikers away from their drug operation. I followed the sound deeper into the mountain. The cave split into 3 tunnels. The clicking was coming from the middle one. My flashlight was barely working now, just a dim yellow glow. But I could see that this passage was different. The walls were covered in what looked like carvings, spirals and symbols that seemed to move in the weak light. The clicking stopped. In the silence that followed, I heard something that made my skin crawl. Breathing. Slow, labored breathing that echoed off the cave walls. But it wasn't coming from ahead of me. It was coming from behind. I spun around, my dying flashlight casting crazy shadows on the cave walls. Nothing there but empty tunnel and those weird symbols. The breathing sound stopped as soon as I turned. "Hello?" My voice echoed back at me. "Rangers! If someone's in here, come out where I can see you." Silence. I pulled out my radio to call for backup, but all I got was static. The mountains always made radio contact tough, but this was different. Just dead air, like something was blocking the signal completely. My flashlight gave one last flicker and died. The darkness in that cave wasn't like anything I'd ever experienced. It was thick, like black soup, pressing in on all sides. I fumbled for my backup light and clicked it on. The beam was strong and steady, thank God. That's when I saw them. The bones I'd photographed in the main chamber. They'd moved. The perfect circles and spirals were gone, replaced by chaotic piles, like someone had kicked through them. But that was impossible. I'd been gone maybe 10 minutes. I heard footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps echoing from the tunnel I'd just left. But they didn't sound right. They sounded wet, squishy, like bare feet walking through mud. "Rangers!" I called out again, my hand moving to the pistol on my belt. "Come out with your hands visible." The footsteps stopped. I waited, heart hammering, but nothing happened. Just that oppressive silence and the feeling of being watched by unseen eyes. The smart thing would be to get out, call for a full investigation team. But something was keeping me there. Maybe it was professional pride, maybe just stupid, stubborn curiosity. I made my way back toward the entrance, stepping carefully around the scattered bones. As I passed one of the skull piles, I could have sworn I saw an empty eye socket turn to follow me. But when I swung my light back, all the skulls were facing forward like before. My nerves were getting to me. 22 years of military and ranger service, and I was jumping at shadows. Outside, Tommy was pacing by his car, smoking a cigarette with shaking hands. "Well?" he asked when he saw me. "What did you find?" "Human remains," I said, keeping my voice professional. "Probably historical. I'll need to call it in, get a forensics team up here." But even as I said it, I knew this wasn't historical. Those bones had been fresh once, recent, and someone was still using that cave. "You should head home," I told Tommy. "Storm's getting worse." He didn't argue. His car was sliding down the mountain road before I'd even finished packing my gear. I should have left too. Standard procedure was to secure the scene and wait for backup. But the snow was really coming down now, and I knew that by morning the road might be impassable. If there was evidence in that cave, evidence of recent murders, every hour counted. I grabbed a better flashlight from my truck, along with emergency flares and a thermos of coffee. Then I hiked back up to the cave. This time, I was going to explore every tunnel, map every chamber, and find out what the hell was going on. The warm air hit me again as soon as I entered. It was even warmer now, almost hot, and it smelled wrong. Not just the musty cave smell I expected, but something else. Something sweet and rotten, like flowers left too long in water. The bone arrangements had changed again. Now they formed arrows, all pointing toward the tunnels I hadn't explored, like someone was guiding me deeper into the mountain. I followed the arrows. The tunnel sloped downward, getting narrower as it went. My footsteps echoed strangely, like the sound was bouncing off surfaces I couldn't see. The carved symbols on the walls were getting more elaborate too. Not random scratches, but deliberate patterns that repeated every few yards. After maybe 100 feet, the tunnel opened into another chamber. This one was smaller than the first, but what I saw there made my blood freeze. A camp. Someone had been living down here. There was a sleeping bag in one corner, old but clean. Canned food stacked neatly against the wall. A camping stove. Books. And in the center of the chamber, another bone arrangement. But this one was different. Fresh bones, still with bits of meat clinging to them. And they were arranged around what looked like an altar made of stacked stones. On top of the altar was a photograph. I walked closer, my light beam steady despite my shaking hands. The photo showed a family. Mother, father, 2 young kids. The kind of picture you'd put on a Christmas card. But someone had scratched out the faces with something sharp, leaving deep gouges in the paper. Underneath the photo was a newspaper clipping. I picked it up with trembling fingers and read the headline, "Local family reported missing after hiking trip." The date on the paper was 3 weeks ago. I heard that wet footstep sound again, closer this time. I spun around, my light cutting through the darkness. At the far end of the chamber, something moved. Just a glimpse, a shape that shouldn't exist, sliding back into the shadows before I could get a clear look. But I saw enough to know it wasn't human. It was too tall, too thin, and it moved wrong, like its joints bent in directions they shouldn't. My hand found my gun, and I drew it without thinking. "Come out," I shouted. "I'm armed." A sound echoed back at me that I'll never forget. Not quite laughter, not quite screaming. Something in between that made every instinct I had scream at me to run. Instead, I followed it deeper into the mountain. The tunnel kept going down, branching off in directions I couldn't track anymore. I tried to mark my path by scratching arrows on the walls, but in the jumping beam of my flashlight, every passage looked the same. The warm air was getting hotter, making me sweat despite the winter storm raging above. That awful laughing, screaming sound echoed around me, always seeming to come from just ahead, just around the next corner. But every time I reached the spot where I thought it originated, there was nothing but empty tunnel and more of those carved symbols. I found the first body in a chamber about the size of my living room. It was hanging from the ceiling, wrapped in what looked like old rope. But when I got closer, I realized it wasn't rope at all. It was dried sinew, twisted into cords strong enough to hold a grown man. The body had been there a while, long enough that I couldn't tell if it was male or female, adult or child. But the bones underneath the dried skin were arranged all wrong, like someone had taken them apart and put them back together, in a different order. My radio crackled with static, then a voice broke through. "Dave, you copy? Storm's getting bad. You need to get off that mountain." I grabbed for the radio. "This is Dave. I'm in the caves at Raven's Peak. I found bodies. Multiple victims. I need backup and a forensics team." More static. Then, "Dave, can't. Signal breaking. Get out." The radio went dead. I was on my own. I kept moving deeper, following the trail of bones and that horrible smell that was getting stronger with each step. The carved symbols on the walls were telling a story, I realized. Pictures of stick figures being hunted through the mountains. Pictures of them being dragged into caves. Pictures of their bones being arranged in those careful patterns I'd seen. And at the end of the story, carved in deep strokes that must have taken hours to complete, was a figure that made my skin crawl. Tall and thin, with arms that reached nearly to the ground and fingers like tree branches. Its face was a skull, but not quite human. Too long, with too many teeth. The Bone Collector. That's what the local legends called it. An old woman who'd been wronged somehow, cursed to wander the mountains collecting the bones of anyone who trespassed on her territory. I'd always figured it was just a story to keep kids from wandering off. But standing there in that tunnel, looking at carvings that were definitely old, older than anything else I'd seen in these mountains, I started to think maybe the legends had more truth to them than I'd wanted to believe. A sound behind me made me turn. Footsteps, multiple sets, moving in perfect synchronization. But these weren't the wet, squishy sounds I'd heard before. These were dry clicking sounds, like bone hitting stone. I raised my flashlight and saw something that nearly made me drop it. They were walking. The skeletons were walking. 5 of them, maybe 6, moving down the tunnel toward me with that awful clicking rhythm. Some were missing arms, others had skulls that sat crooked on their spines. But they all moved with purpose, reaching toward me with whatever limbs they had left. I did what any sane person would do. I ran. Behind me, the clicking sounds multiplied. More skeletons joining the pursuit until it sounded like a percussion section made of nightmares. My flashlight beam bounced wildly as I ran, showing me glimpses of tunnel walls covered in more of those carved symbols. I took a turn too fast and slammed into the rock wall, scraping skin off my shoulder. The impact knocked my flashlight from my hand, and I heard it clatter away into the darkness. For a moment, I was completely blind, the clicking sounds getting closer, echoing off the walls from every direction. I fumbled for my backup light and clicked it on just as the first skeleton reached me. It was small, a child, maybe 8 years old when it died. But there was nothing childlike about the way it lunged at me, bony fingers reaching for my throat. I grabbed the nearest thing I could find, a loose rock about the size of a softball, and swung it hard. The skeleton's skull exploded into fragments, and the rest of the bones collapsed to the tunnel floor. But there were more coming, lots more, and my light was showing me things I didn't want to see. These weren't just random skeletons. They were trophies. Each one had been carefully prepared, the bones cleaned and polished and arranged just so. Some had scraps of clothing still clinging to them, a child's sneaker, a woman's wedding ring still on a skeletal finger, a man's watch that had stopped at 3:17. I ran again, smashing through grasping bone fingers and kicking aside rib cages that tried to trip me. The tunnel was sloping upward now, and I could feel a slight breeze on my face. Fresh air. An exit. But as I ran toward what I hoped was freedom, I heard something that stopped me cold. A voice. Human, but wrong somehow, like it was coming from a throat that had forgotten on how to form words properly. David Wolfbane. It knew my name. Your grandfather walked these tunnels, left his bones here. For me. My grandfather. He'd disappeared in Cham, these mountains in 1942, when my father was just a boy. Search teams looked for weeks, but never found a trace of him. The voice was getting closer, echoing from the tunnels behind me. You have his scent, his blood. You belong with the collection. I reached the end of the tunnel and found myself in a chamber so large my flashlight couldn't reach the far walls. But what I could see made me understand exactly what I was dealing with. The entire chamber was filled with bones, not scattered like in the first cave, but built into structures. Bone houses, bone towers, bone furniture. And in the center, sitting on a throne made of human skulls, was the thing that had been hunting me, the bone collector. It was huge, maybe 8 feet tall with arms that reached nearly to the ground and fingers like gnarled tree roots. Its skin was the color and texture of old leather, stretched tight over bones that seemed too long for any human body. But it was the eyes that really got to me. They were still human eyes, trapped in that horrible face, and they were full of pain and rage that had been building for centuries. You came, it said, and its voice was like wind through dry leaves. Just like grandfather came to feed the collection. Around the throne, I could see dozens of skeletons standing at attention like an army. Some were obviously recent, bones still white and clean. Others were yellowed with age, held together by nothing but the thing's will. What do you want? I managed to ask, though my voice came out as barely a whisper. The bone collector stood up from its throne, unfolding like a praying mantis. Justice, it hissed. They took my children, burned my home, left me to starve. As it spoke, images flashed through my mind. Not my memories, but hers. I saw a cabin in the woods, a woman tending a garden while 3 small children, laid nearby. I saw men on horseback carrying torches and guns. I saw the cabin burning, the children screaming, the woman fighting desperately to save them. I saw her dying in these caves, cursing with her last breath anyone who would enter her territory. That was 300 years ago, I said. Those people are dead. Their children are dead. Everyone who hurt you is gone. The thing that had once been a woman tilted its head, studying me with those pain-filled eyes. But their descendants remain. Their blood still flows. Still owes. The skeleton army started moving, forming a circle around me, clicking, clicking, clicking as bone met stone. I was trapped. My grandfather, I said desperately. What happened to him? She gestured toward one corner of the chamber where a skeleton in the tattered remains of a ranger uniform stood at attention. The name tag was still pinned to the shirt. R. Wolfbane. He tried to help, the bone collector said. Spoke of justice, of wrong and right. But still, he fed the collection. The circle was getting tighter. I could see gaps in the walls where other passages led, escape routes if I could reach them. But there were too many skeletons, and they were all reaching for me with their bony fingers. Then I heard another voice, quiet, but clear as day. David. I turned and saw him standing apart from the others. My grandfather, Robert Wolfbane. But unlike the other skeletons, he wasn't reaching for me. He was pointing towards something behind the bone collector's throne. The stones, he whispered, his voice somehow reaching me across 40 years of death. Break the stones. I followed his pointing finger and saw what he meant. Behind the throne, carved into the cave wall itself, was a spiral of symbols much older and more elaborate than the others. And at the center of the spiral, 3 black stones had been set into the rock like jewels, the binding stones, the source of her power. The bone collector must have seen where I was looking because she let out a shriek that nearly shattered my eardrums. The skeleton army lunged forward all at once, a wave of clicking, grasping bones. I dove to the side, rolling behind the throne just as skeletal hands grabbed for where my head had been. The bone collector spun around, faster than anything that size should have been able to move, and swiped at me with those impossibly long arms. Her claws caught my jacket and tore it to shreds, but missed the flesh underneath. I scrambled toward the wall where the binding stones waited, pulling out my service weapon and firing 3 quick shots. The bullets passed right through her, doing no damage at all. But the sound echoed through the chamber, and for just a moment the skeletons stopped moving. That moment was all I needed. I grabbed the largest rock I could find, a chunk of limestone about the size of a football, and brought it down on the first binding stone as hard as I could. The stone cracked. The bone collector screamed, a sound like all the pain in the world given voice. The skeletons around me began to tremble, bones rattling like wind chimes in a hurricane. I hit the second stone. It shattered completely. Half the skeleton army collapsed, bones scattering across the cave floor like dropped toys. The bone collector was shrinking too, becoming more human-sized, the ancient evil that had sustained her for centuries beginning to leak away. "Please," she said, and for the first time her voice sounded almost normal, almost human. "Please. They killed my babies." I looked at the third stone, raised my rock to smash it, and hesitated. Those images she'd shown me, of her children burning, of her dying alone in these caves, they weren't lies. She had been wronged, terribly, inexcusably wronged. But how many innocents had paid for that wrong? How many families destroyed to feed her need for justice? "I'm sorry," I said. "I'm sorry for what they did to you. But this isn't justice. This is just more death." I brought the rock down on the final binding stone. The stone exploded like a gunshot, and suddenly the chamber was filled with light. Not artificial light from my flashlight, but warm, golden light that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. In that light, the bone collector changed one last time. The leather skin fell away like a shed snakeskin. The 2 long bones shortened and straightened. The claws became hands, human hands. And when the transformation was complete, standing before me was a woman, maybe 30 years old, wearing a simple dress that belonged to another century. She was beautiful. Not the terrible beauty of something inhuman, but the simple, honest beauty of a mother who had loved her children more than her own life. "Thank you," she said, and her voice was soft and sad and grateful all at once. "I had forgotten who I was." Around us, the remaining skeletons were changing too. The bones were settling into neat piles, no longer animated by rage and ancient magic. But more than that, I could see them. The spirits of the people who had died in these caves. They were standing behind their earthly remains, looking peaceful for the first time in years or decades or centuries. My grandfather was among them. He walked over to me, not quite solid, but definitely there, and put a hand on my shoulder that I could actually feel. "You did good, boy," he said. "I'm proud of you." "Grandpa, But he was already fading, along with all the others. The golden light was fading too, leaving me alone in a cave full of bones and a woman who had been dead for 300 years. She was fading as well, becoming transparent around the edges. "Will they be all right?" I asked. "The people who died here?" She smiled, and in that smile I could see the mother she had been, before grief and rage had twisted her into something else. "They are free now, as am I." She looked around the chamber one last time. "Bury them properly, they deserve that much." And then she was gone, and I was alone with several hundred skeletons and a very long walk back to civilization. It took me 6 hours to find my way out of the caves. 6 hours of following my scratched arrows and hoping I wouldn't get lost in passages that seemed to shift and change when I wasn't looking directly at them. But finally, I saw a natural light ahead and stumbled out into a world transformed by snow. The storm had passed. Everything was white and clean and peaceful, like the mountain itself had been washed clean of old sins. My radio crackled to life the moment I stepped outside. "Dave! Dave, are you there? We've been trying to reach you all night." "I'm here," I said. "I'm okay. But I need you to send up a full forensics team and about a dozen body bags, maybe more." "Body bags? Dave, what the hell happened up there?" I looked back at the cave entrance, already half buried by snow. In a few hours, you'd never know it was there. But I'd know. I'd always know. "Justice," I said. "Finally." The official report listed it as a historical burial site, probably dating back to the Civil War. The bones were given proper burial in the town cemetery, with headstones for the ones we could identify and a memorial for the rest. The families who had lost loved ones over the years finally had closure, even if they never learned the whole truth. I never told anyone about the bone collector. Who would believe it? But sometimes on quiet nights when the wind is blowing just right through the trees, I think about her. A woman who loved her children so much that she let grief and rage consume her for 3 centuries. A woman who finally found peace when someone acknowledged that yes, she had been wronged, but that didn't make her crusade right. I retired the following spring. 18 years as a ranger was enough. These days I work part-time as a consultant for missing persons cases, and I've gotten pretty good at sensing when a disappearance might involve something more than human criminals. Because here's the thing I learned in those caves. Sometimes the monsters we create through our cruelty and indifference are worse than anything that was born that way. And sometimes the only way to stop them is to see them as they truly are. Not monsters, but people who've been hurt so badly they forgot how to be human. The mountains are quiet now. Hikers come and go without incident, and the missing persons rate has dropped to normal levels. Raven's Peak has become just another scenic destination with no hint of the horrors that once lived in its depths. But I still patrol these mountains sometimes, just to be sure. Because evil has a way of taking root in places where great wrongs have been done, and it's important to keep watch. My grandfather would have understood that. After all, he spent 40 years in those caves, waiting for someone to finish what he'd started. Some jobs run in the family, and some monsters are just people who've been waiting for someone to see them clearly enough to set them free. My name is Jennifer Moonwhisper, but everyone calls me Jenny. I'm a park naturalist at Shenandoah National Park, and I spend most days explaining to tourists why the mountains look the way they do. I have a PhD in geology, which sounds fancy, but really it just means I love rocks more than most people love their pets. The summer of 1979 was hotter than usual. The air hung thick and heavy, making everything feel slow and sticky. I was working on an article for National Geographic about acoustic geology, how sound travels through different rock formations. It was the kind of project that could make my career if I got it right. That's when the reports started coming in about Hemlock Hollow. The hollow sits about 3 miles up the Appalachian Trail, tucked away like nature's secret amphitheater. Massive granite stones form a perfect circle, each one taller than a grown man. Cherokee people used to come here for ceremonies, according to the old park records. Now it's mostly hikers who stumble across it by accident. But in June, something changed. A family from Ohio came down from the trail looking shaken. The father, a big man with sunburned arms, kept shaking his head as he talked to me at the visitor center. "Those rocks were singing," he said. "I know how that sounds, but I swear they were making music. Like a church choir, but older." His wife nodded quickly. "It was beautiful but scary at the same time. Made our skin crawl." Their teenage daughter hadn't said a word since they got back. She just stared at her hands, humming something under her breath that sounded like no tune I'd ever heard. I get weird reports all the time. People see Bigfoot in the rhododendron bushes or claim they've found Cherokee gold. Usually I just smile and suggest they drink more water when they're hiking. But something about this family felt different. They weren't the type to make thin. G's up. 2 days later, another group came down with the same story, then another. Always the same details. Rocks singing at dawn, beautiful harmonies that made you want to cry, and afterward, people acting strange for hours. Some hummed tunes they couldn't remember learning. Others just went quiet, like they'd heard something they weren't supposed to. My great-grandmother was Cherokee. She died when I was 12, but I still remembered the stories she used to tell about places where the earth itself had memory. She'd touch my hand and say, "Jenny girl, some spots hold on to voices longer than they should." I'd always thought she was just trying to scare me into being good. By the 3rd week of June, I couldn't ignore it anymore. I packed my acoustic equipment, my camping gear, and enough scientific skepticism to last a weekend. Whatever was happening at Hemlock Hollow had a perfectly logical explanation. I just had to find it. The hike up took 2 hours. The trail was empty except for a few day hikers heading back down. One of them, an older woman with a walking stick, stopped me near the halfway point. "You heading to the hollow?" she asked. I nodded. "Don't go alone," she said. "Something's not right up there. Hasn't been right for weeks." She walked away before I could ask what she meant. The woods grew thicker as I climbed higher. Oak and maple gave way to dense hemlock groves that blocked out most of the sun. The air got cooler, which should have felt good after the heat down in the valley. Instead, it felt heavy, like breathing through wet cloth. When I finally reached Hemlock Hollow, the first thing I noticed was the silence. Not normal forest quiet, the kind of silence that means everything is hiding. No birds, no insects. Even the wind seemed afraid to make noise. The stone circle looked exactly like it did in all the park photos, but seeing it in person was different. These weren't just rocks, they were monuments, each one placed with purpose and care. The granite had a strange shimmer to it, like there were crystals mixed in that caught light from nowhere. I set up my tent on the far side of the hollow and arranged my equipment. Acoustic sensors, digital recorders, even an old analog device I'd borrowed from the university. If these stones were making music, I was going to capture every note. As the sun went down, the silence got deeper. I ate dinner from a can and tried to read, but I kept looking up at the stones. They seemed bigger in the twilight, like they were leaning in to listen to something I couldn't hear. I went to sleep that night thinking about my great-grandmother's stories and wondering why I'd never paid more attention. I woke up before dawn to the most beautiful sound I'd ever heard. It started soft, like wind through trees, but wind doesn't have harmony. This was singing, human voices blending together in ways that made my chest tight with emotion I couldn't name. The melody seemed familiar, like something I'd heard in dreams. I grabbed my equipment and stumbled out of the tent. The stone circle was glowing, not bright like electric lights, more like moonlight, but the moon had set hours ago. Each massive granite stone had a soft silver shimmer that pulsed in time with the singing. My hands shook as I turned on the recorders. The digital display showed sound levels way higher than anything the human ear should be able to handle, but the singing didn't hurt. It felt like coming home to a place I'd never been. The voices weren't English. They weren't any language I recognized, but somehow I understood the feeling behind the words. Sadness, longing, and something else. A warning. Through my headphones, the music sounded different. Layered. Like dozens of voices singing the same song across centuries, all at once. I could hear individual parts weaving together, Deep bass notes that seemed to come from inside the stones themselves, high, clear voices that sounded like children, and in between, adult voices carrying melodies that made my Cherokee blood remember things my mind had forgotten. As the sky grew lighter, the singing grew stronger. The stones pulsed brighter. And I saw them. Shadows that weren't quite shadows moving between the stones. At first I thought it was just my eyes adjusting to the weird light. But the shadows had shape. They were people, or had been people once. Tall figures in buckskin and feathers, their faces painted for ceremony. They moved in slow circles around the stones, their feet making no sound on the forest floor. Some carried objects I couldn't quite see clearly. Others held their hands up to the sky like they were catching something falling from the stars. I tried to stay calm. This was just a hallucination brought on by acoustic vibrations. Infrasound could make people see things that weren't there. That was science. That made sense. But then one of the figures looked directly at me. Her face was painted with white clay and red ochre in patterns that seemed to shift when I wasn't looking straight at them. Her eyes were dark and deep, like pools of water that went down forever. When she smiled, I heard my great-grandmother's voice saying my name. Jenny girl. I dropped my headphones. The cord yanked the recorder off its tripod, and it hit the ground with a crash that broke the spell. The singing stopped mid-note. The lights faded. The shadows disappeared like smoke. I stood alone in Hemlock Hollow with the sun coming up and my equipment scattered around my feet. The digital recorder was still running. I played back what it had captured, expecting to hear nothing but wind and my own breathing. Instead, I heard the voices. All of them. Crystal clear and impossible. But there was something else on the recording, something I hadn't noticed while the singing was happening. Underneath the beautiful harmony was another sound. Lower, angrier, like something trying to claw its way out of the earth itself. I packed up my gear with hands that wouldn't stop shaking and hiked back to the park headquarters as fast as I could. The whole way down, I felt like something was following me just out of sight, matching my pace, waiting for me to turn around. Back at the visitor center, I found Tom Bradley, the head ranger, dealing with a small crowd of hikers. They're all saying the same thing, he told me when I pulled him aside. Heard singing up at the hollow around dawn. Now they want to go back up there with their families to hear it again. Don't let them, I said. He looked at me funny. Jenny, you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost. The word ghost made my skin crawl. Just keep people away from the hollow for a few days, until I can figure out what's causing the acoustic phenomenon. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that painted face looking at me with recognition, like she'd been waiting for me specifically. I kept hearing my great-grandmother's voice mixed in with the stone singers, calling my name with love and disappointment. I had avoided thinking about my Cherokee heritage for years. It was easier to be just a scientist, just Dr. Jennifer Moonwhisper with the fancy degree and the rational explanations. Being Cherokee Irish meant dealing with questions I didn't want to answer and stories I didn't want to believe. But the stones were singing, and something in their song knew exactly who I was. I went back to the hollow 3 more times over the next week. Each time, the singing got stronger, and the visions got clearer. By my second visit, I could make out individual faces among the shadow people, warriors with scars from old battles, women with babies tied to their backs, elders with eyes that held the wisdom of mountains. They moved through their ceremonies like they had been doing it forever and would keep doing it long after the world ended. But I wasn't the only one being drawn back to the stones. On Wednesday morning, I found fresh footprints around the hollow, boot prints from at least 6 different people, all leading to the center of the stone circle. In the middle, someone had built a small fire. The ashes were still warm. Scattered around the fire pit were personal items: a wedding ring, a child's toy dinosaur, a photograph of a young soldier, a pair of reading glasses, things people had left as offerings. That afternoon, Tom radioed me with more bad news. Jenny, I've got 12 people asking for permits to camp at the hollow. They all heard the singing and want to experience it again. Some of them are talking about spiritual awakening and ancestral calling. What am I supposed to tell them? Tell them it's closed for geological survey, I said. For how long? I didn't have an answer for that. The third time I went back, I brought more equipment and a lot more courage. I also brought tobacco, the way my great-grandmother had taught me to approach sacred places. I left it at the base of the largest stone and whispered a prayer I half remembered from childhood. The shadow people seemed calmer that night. They still moved through their ceremonies, but some of them nodded to me as they passed. A few even smiled. One old woman reached out like she was going to touch my face, but her hand passed through me like cool smoke. That's when I realized I might have it backward. Maybe I was the ghost here. Maybe I was seeing the hollow the way it really was, and my normal world was the shadow. The singing that night was different too. Sadder. More urgent. And mixed in with the Cherokee voices, I started hearing other things. Screams, crying, the sound of something being dragged across stone. I looked closer at the ceremonies happening around me, and I saw what I had missed before. Not all of the shadow people were participating willingly. Some were bound with rope. Others had terror in their inn. Yes, and the largest stone, the one I had put tobacco at, was stained dark at its base. This hadn't just been a place for ceremonies. It had been a place for punishment. The beautiful. Singing wasn't just music. It was the voices of people who had died here, singing their death songs over and over, trapped between worlds by violence and injustice. As this understanding hit me, the singing changed again. The harmonies turned into discord. The shadow people stopped their gentle movements and turned to stare at me with eyes that were no longer kind. The old woman who had tried to touch my face pointed one translucent finger at me and spoke in Cherokee. I couldn't understand all the words, but I got the meaning. You let us suffer. You forgot us. You chose their world over ours. The stones began to pulse faster. The air grew thick and hard to breathe. And from somewhere deep in the earth beneath the hollow, something else started to sing along with the Cherokee voices. Something that had never been human. It was the sound I had heard on my first recording. The angry, clawing thing that lived underneath the sacred music. And now it was rising. The shadow people scattered like smoke as this new presence pushed up from below. The stone's light turned from silver to red. The beautiful Cherokee ceremonies dissolved into chaos, replaced by something much older and hungrier. I ran. I grabbed my equipment and ran down the trail in the dark, branches tearing at my clothes and rocks trying to trip me with every step. Behind me, the singing turned into howling, and the howling turned into something that sounded like my name being called by a voice made of grinding stone and ancient rage. I made it back to my truck and drove straight to the Cherokee Cultural Center in town. If this was about my heritage, I needed to talk to someone who understood what I clearly didn't. James Crow Feather was the Cultural Center's director, a man in his 60s who had dedicated his life to preserving Cherokee history. When I told him about the hollow, his face went pale. Hemlock. Hollow, he said quietly. We call it Gadugi Unadaya, the place where harmony was broken. He told me the story I should have learned years ago from my great-grandmother, if I had been listening. Long before the white settlers came, that place was used for justice. Cherokee law said that those who committed terrible crimes against the people should face their punishment where the spirits could witness it. Some were executed, others were banished. But something went wrong there, in the years before the Trail of Tears. He paused, looking at me like he was deciding whether I could handle the truth. A medicine man named Dragging Canoe was accused of using dark magic to curse other tribes. The evidence was strong, but he swore he was innocent. They executed him at the hollow anyway, and his blood soaked into the largest stone. What happened then? His spirit never left, and his anger called up something else, something that had been sleeping deep in the mountains since the world was young. The Cherokee people abandoned the hollow after that. We sealed it with songs and prayers and stayed away. James looked at me with eyes that were sad and afraid. But the seals are breaking, aren't they? The spirits are singing again, and the old darkness is listening. I nodded. Then you have to go back, he said. Your great-grandmother was Anna Groundhog, wasn't she? She was the one who helped create the seals. If they're failing, it's because her bloodline needs to renew them. I don't know how, I said. That's why the spirits are calling you, James said. They're trying to teach you, but you have to listen with more than your scientist ears. That night I sat in my apartment staring at all my equipment and trying to understand what I was really dealing with. The Cherokee ancestors weren't just trapped at the hollow, they were trying to hold something back. Something that, at Dragging Canoe's death, had awakened. Something that fed on anger and pain and wanted nothing more than to spread both as far as it could. And I was the only one left who might be able to stop it. I went back to the hollow on the summer solstice, carrying everything James Crowfeather had given me. Sage for purification, tobacco for offerings, a small pouch of cornmeal, and most importantly, the words to songs I had never learned, but somehow knew. The singing started before I even reached the stone circle. This time, it was different, desperate, urgent, like people calling for help. The Cherokee voices were still there, but they were being drowned out by the other thing, the angry presence that lived in the deep places of the mountain. As I entered the hollow, I could see the battle happening in the spirit world. The Cherokee dead were arranged in a defensive circle around the stones, their ghostly forms flickering like candle flames in a hurricane. They were singing the old protection songs, but their voices were getting weaker with each passing moment. And rising up from cracks in the earth came tentacles of pure darkness, not shadow, but actual darkness that hurt to look at. They wrapped around the ankles of the Cherokee spirits and pulled them down, trying to drag them into whatever pit Dragging Canoe's rage had opened. At the center of it all stood the largest stone, and carved into its surface were symbols I hadn't noticed before. Cherokee writing mixed with something much older, spiraling around and around until they formed a pattern that made my eyes water. Blood was seeping from the base of the stone, fresh blood, even though no one had died here in over a century. I approached the stone with my offerings, but as soon as I got close, a figure stepped out from behind it. A Cherokee man with a painted face and eyes like holes in the world. Dragging Canoe himself, still angry, still claiming innocence, still calling up darkness to prove his point. He spoke to me in Cherokee, but this time I understood every word. You are Anna Groundhog's blood, and you abandoned us. You chose the white world over your people. You let the seals weaken while you played with rocks and forgot the songs. I didn't know, I said. You didn't want to know. But now the darkness rises, and it will spread beyond this mountain. It will poison every sacred place, turn every ancestor against their children, until there is nothing left but rage and pain. As he spoke, I could feel his power pressing against my mind. He was trying to turn me angry, trying to make me blame everyone who had failed to teach me, everyone who had let Cherokee culture fade, everyone who had ever made me feel ashamed of my heritage. And for a moment, it worked. I felt fury rising in my chest, at my parents for not teaching me the language, at my great-grandmother for dying before I was ready to listen, at myself for choosing science over spirit, at the whole world for making me feel like I had to pick sides. The darkness around Dragging Canoe grew stronger, fed by my anger. The Cherokee spirits cried out as more of them were dragged down into the earth. The stones began to crack, and through the cracks came sounds of destruction from far away. Other sacred places being corrupted, other ancestors being turned to rage. But then I heard my great-grandmother's voice, not as part of the general Cherokee chorus, but speaking directly to me. Jenny girl, anger is easy. Healing is hard. Which one are you going to choose? I looked at Dragging Canoe, really looked at him, and saw past the rage to the pain underneath. He hadn't been a monster. He had been a medicine man falsely accused, executed for crimes he didn't commit, his spirit twisted by injustice until he became the very evil he had been accused of being. You're right, I told him. What happened to you was wrong. You were innocent, and they killed you anyway. You have every reason to be angry. His eyes widened, with surprise. The darkness around him wavered. But this won't fix it, I continued. Spreading your pain to every sacred place won't bring you justice. It just creates more victims. Took out the tobacco James had given me and placed it at the base of the blood-stained stone. I offer this not as payment for your silence, but as recognition of your suffering. You were wronged. Your people were wronged. I acknowledge this truth. Then I took out the sage and lit it, letting the smoke carry my words to the Cherokee spirits still fighting around the circle. Ancestors, I am Anna Groundhog's granddaughter. I am sorry I forgot you. I am sorry I turned away from your teachings. I am ready to learn now, if you will teach me. The Cherokee dead stopped their desperate singing and turned to look at me. I saw recognition in their faces, and relief, and something that might have been forgiveness. Teach me the sealing songs, I said. Show me how to heal this place. And they did. The words came to me in Cherokee, flowing from their lips to mine like water finding its course. I sang protection over the hollow, binding the darkness back into the deep places where it belonged. I sang healing over Dragging Canoe's spirit, offering him the peace that execution had stolen from him. He fought it at first, clinging to his rage like armor. But as I kept singing, kept acknowledging his pain while refusing to feed his anger, he began to let go. The darkness released its hold on him, and for the first time in 2 centuries he looked like the medicine man he had been. Tired, hurt, but not evil. Thank you, he whispered, and faded into light. With their tormentor gone, the other Cherokee spirits could complete their work. They sang the old songs with me, teaching me the words and melodies that had protected sacred places for thousands of years. Together, we rewove the spiritual barriers around Hemlock Hollow, sealing it from corruption while still allowing it to serve as a bridge between the worlds. As the sun rose, the last of the Cherokee voices faded away. But they left behind a feeling of completion, of harmony restored. The stones stopped glowing, but they hummed now with a different energy, not the desperate call of trapped spirits, but the gentle song of ancestors at rest. I was alone in the hollow with my equipment and my offerings, and for the first time since this all began, the silence felt peaceful instead of ominous. It's been 3 months since the solstice, and Hemlock Hollow is quiet now. Not the terrible silence of things hiding, but the good quiet of a place at peace with itself. I've been back dozens of times, always bringing tobacco, always listening for signs that the seals might be weakening again. But the stones sing softly now, keeping their harmony without calling for help. Sometimes hikers still report hearing music at dawn, but they describe it as beautiful and comforting, like a lullaby the mountain sings to itself. My life has changed in ways I'm still figuring out. I kept my job with the Park Service, but my research focus has shifted. Instead of just studying acoustic geology, I'm documenting the intersection between natural phenomena and indigenous spiritual practices. The National Geographic article became something very different from what I originally planned. A piece about how ancient wisdom and modern science can work together to understand places that are more than just rock and soil. James Crow. Feather has become my teacher in ways my great-grandmother never got the chance to be. He's helping me learn Cherokee language and customs, not as a replacement for my scientific knowledge, but as a complement to it. I'm discovering that being Cherokee and being a geologist aren't conflicting identities. They're 2 ways of understanding the same truth about how deeply connected everything really is. I've also become an unofficial guardian of other sacred sites throughout the park. There are places here the spiritual and physical worlds touch, and some of them need watching. I use my position as a park naturalist to make sure they're protected while teaching visitors to approach them with proper respect. The most important change is harder to put into words. That night at the Hollow, I stopped being afraid of the parts of myself I couldn't measure or explain. I learned that acknowledging mystery doesn't mean abandoning reason. It means understanding that reason has limits, and that's okay. Sometimes, late at night in my apartment, I still hear echoes of the Cherokee voices, not calling for help anymore, just letting me know they're still there, still watching over the places that matter. My great-grandmother's voice is among them now, and when I catch fragments of her words on the wind, they're always the same. Jenny girl, you did good. But I know my work isn't finished. The darkness that dragging canoe called up from the deep places of the earth is still down there, still hungry, still looking for cracks in the world's protection. There are other angry spirits in other places, other injustices that have carved wounds in the land itself. And I'm starting to understand that what happened at Hemlock Hollow was just the beginning. Last week I got reports of strange lights and impossible music at a Civil War battlefield 2 counties over. The week before that, hikers complained about sad singing coming from a mountain where Cherokee families were massacred during the Trail of Tears. The spirits are calling again, and this time I'm ready to listen. After all, someone has to stand guard at the places where the worlds touch. Someone has to remember the old songs and learn the new ones. Someone has to keep the balance between honoring the past and protecting the future. My name is Jennifer Moonwhisper, and I am my great-grandmother's granddaughter. I am Cherokee and Irish, scientist and spirit keeper, keeper of both rational truth and ancestral wisdom. And when the stones sing, I sing back. My name is Marcus Ashwood, and I've been a park ranger for 11 years. I'm telling you this story because someone needs to know what really happened in Blood Mountain Hollow back in 1972. The official report says 2 children got lost and found their way back after a few days. That's not what happened. Not even close. I work the Cherokee National Forest in Tennessee, 25 miles from the nearest town, deep in mountains that have been here since before people had names for them. My ranger station sits at the edge of Blood Mountain Hollow, a place locals won't talk about much. When they do, it's always in whispers. The hollow got its name from an old Cherokee story about children who died young. The Cherokee called them Nunnehi, spirit children who lived in the mountains. But I didn't believe in ghost stories. I believed in search grids and radio checks and keeping people safe in the wilderness. That was my job. I'd been doing it alone since my divorce 6 months earlier. Sarah couldn't handle the isolation anymore, she said. Couldn't handle watching me drink myself to sleep every night. She was probably right. I'd been drinking more since we lost Katie. Katie was our daughter, 7 years old when the leukemia took her. Blonde curls and gap-toothed smile. She used to beg me to take her camping, but I always said next weekend or when you're older. Then she got sick, and there weren't any more weekends. After that, I threw myself into the job, became obsessed with keeping other people's children safe. Every missing hiker, every lost camper, I'd find them. Had to find them. My success rate was perfect until October 1972. That's when the Whitman family came up from Nashville for a weekend camping trip. Tom and Linda Whitman, their 7-year-old daughter Emma, sweet kid with pigtails and a pink jacket, reminded me of Katie in a way that made my chest tight. Hey, set up camp at Deer Creek about 2 miles into the hollow. Good spot, near water, plenty of flat ground. I checked on them Friday evening, made sure they had everything they needed. Emma was collecting colorful leaves while her parents set up the tent. Normal family vacation stuff. Saturday morning, my radio crackled to life at 6:30 a.m. Tom Whitman's voice, high and tight with panic. Ranger Station, this is Campsite 7. My daughter is missing. She was in her sleeping bag when we went to bed. Now she's gone. I was in my truck in 2 minutes, racing down the mountain road. The fog was thick that morning, rolling through the trees like smoke. First frost of the season had killed most of the vegetation overnight, leaving everything brown and brittle. The forest felt different somehow, quieter. When I got to their campsite, Linda Whitman was crying. Tom was pacing around their tent, calling Emma's name. No answer came back from the woods. When did you last see her? I asked, pulling out my notebook. Bedtime, Linda said through her tears. Around 9 o'clock. She was tired from hiking all day. She went right to sleep. I examined their tent. No tears in the fabric, no signs of struggle. Emma's sleeping bag was still warm, which meant she hadn't been gone long. But there were no footprints leading away from the camp, not on the soft ground around their fire pit, not on the trail leading back to the main road. She has to be around here somewhere, Tom said. Kids don't just vanish. But I'd already seen something that made my stomach drop. At the edge of their campsite, right where the forest began, There was a line of small footprints in the frost-covered leaves. Bare feet, child-sized. But Emma had been wearing shoes when I saw her yesterday, and the prints were leading deeper into Blood Mountain Hollow, toward places no 7-year-old should ever go alone. I called for backup and got a search team together by noon. 6 volunteers from town plus me. We brought tracking dogs and radios and enough gear to search until dark if we had to. The dogs were my first clue something was wrong. Max, a German shepherd who'd helped me find dozens of lost hikers, wouldn't follow Emma's trail. He'd sniff around the campsite just fine, but the moment I led him toward those bare footprints, he'd whine and back away. "What's wrong with him?" asked Pete Morrison, one of the volunteers. "Don't know," I said, but that was a lie. Max was scared. I'd never seen him scared of anything before. We split into 3 teams and started a grid search. The plan was simple: cover every square mile of the hollow, call out Emma's name, follow any trail we found. Standard procedure for a missing child. But nothing about that search was standard. First thing I noticed was the silence. These mountains are usually full of sound: birds calling, squirrels chattering, wind through the leaves. That day, nothing. Complete silence, except for our voices calling Emma's name. The second thing was the cold. October in Tennessee is usually warm during the day, cool at night. But that afternoon felt like January. Every breath came out as white vapor, and frost stayed on the trees even though the sun was shining. I followed those bare footprints deeper into the hollow. They led along Deer Creek for about half a mile, then turned uphill toward the old Cherokee burial ground. The prints were clear in the muddy creek bank, small feet, maybe size 2 or 3. But they were mixed with other prints. Lots of other prints. All bare feet. All child-sized. "Marcus." The voice came from my radio, crackling with static. It was Jim Hensley, leading Team 2. "You need to get over here. Found something weird." I met Jim about a quarter mile upstream. He was standing next to a big oak tree, staring up at the trunk. "Look at this," he said. Carved into the bark, about 4 feet off the ground, were dozens of small handprints. Not carved, actually. Pressed. Like children, had dipped their hands in clay and pressed them against the tree. But the impressions were deep, pushed right into the wood itself. "How long you think these have been here?" Jim asked. I touched one of the handprints. It was ice cold, and for just a second I could swear I felt fingers pressing back from inside the tree. "Long time," I said, pulling my hand away. But that was another lie. The wood around those handprints was fresh, still bleeding sap. They'd been made recently, maybe even this morning. Team 3 found something else an hour later. Sarah Chen, a local teacher who helped with searches, called us over to a clearing about 50 yards from the burial ground. "Children have been playing here," she said. The clearing was full of toys, old toys, wooden dolls with painted faces, carved animals, cornhusk figures. They were arranged in a perfect circle, like kids had been playing Ring Around the Rosie and just walked away. "These are old," Sarah said, picking up one of the dolls. "Really old. Cherokee, maybe, but look." In the center of the circle was Emma's pink jacket, folded neatly, like someone had taken it off and set it down carefully. "Emma!" I called out. "Emma, can you hear me?" My voice echoed off the mountains, but no answer came back. Just that terrible silence. Then I heard something else. Faint, almost too quiet to notice. Children laughing. "You hear that?" I asked Sarah. She tilted her head, listening. "Hear what?" The laughter came again, drifting through the trees like wind. Happy children playing somewhere in the forest. But we'd been searching for 3 hours and hadn't seen another soul. "Split up," I told the team. "Stay in radio contact. If anyone sees Emma or hears voices, call immediately." I followed the sound of laughter deeper into the hollow. It led me up a steep ridge, through stands of pine and oak, past outcroppings of gray sand. 1. The temperature kept dropping as I climbed, and my breath came in short puffs. The laughter got louder. Definitely children, maybe 4 or 5 of them, playing some kind of game. But every time I thought I was getting close, the sound would move, always just ahead of me, always just out of sight. I reached the top of the ridge as the sun was setting. The hollow spread out below me, filled with shadow and mist. And there, in a meadow about 200 yards away, I saw them. Children, maybe 6 or 7 of them, running in a circle, holding hands. They were pale, wearing old-fashioned clothes, long dresses for the girls, knee-length pants for the boys. And they were all barefoot. "Hey," I called out. "Hey, kids." They stopped running and looked up at me. Even from that distance, I could see their faces clearly. Too clearly, like I was looking through binoculars. They were beautiful children, with perfect skin and bright eyes. But something was wrong with them. Something I couldn't quite name. Then I saw Emma. She was standing in the center of the circle, still in her camping clothes. The other children were holding out their hands to her, inviting her to join their game. "Emma," I shouted, starting down the ridge. "Emma, stay right there." But when I looked up again, the meadow was empty. No children, no Emma. Just tall grass swaying in the wind. My radio crackled. "Marcus, where are you? It's getting dark. We need to head back." I looked around, confused. When had it gotten dark? The sun had been setting just a moment ago, but now full darkness had fallen. Stars were out, and a thin moon cast everything in silver light. "I'm coming," I said into the radio. But I wasn't sure I could find my way back. Nothing looked familiar anymore. The trees seemed different, older. The rocks had strange shapes I didn't remember. And somewhere in the distance, I could still hear children laughing. We searched for 3 more days, brought in state police, search helicopters, tracking dogs from 3 counties. Blood Mountain Hollow was crawling with people, but we might as well have been looking for smoke. Emma Whitman had vanished completely, but other things started happening. Strange things that made my skin crawl. Tuesday morning, I found more handprints on trees throughout the hollow. Dozens of them, all child-sized, all pressed deep into the bark. They appeared overnight, and they were always ice-cold to the touch. Tuesday afternoon, Pete Morrison quit the search team. Said he kept hearing his dead son calling his name from the woods. Pete's boy had drowned 5 years earlier, but Pete swore he heard him laughing and playing with other children. "It's this place," Pete said, packing up his gear. "Something's wrong with this place. Kids who come here don't leave." Wednesday morning brought worse news. Another family had been camping at the north end of the hollow, the Garcias from Memphis. Their 8-year-old son Miguel was missing. Same story as Emma. Went to sleep in his tent, gone by morning. No signs of struggle, no footprints leading away, except for those bare, child-sized tracks in the frost. I found Miguel's parents at their campsite, crying and holding each other. Mrs. Garcia grabbed my arm when she saw me. "Please find him," she begged. "He's all we have." "I will," I said, but the words felt hollow. How could I find Miguel when I couldn't even find Emma? That afternoon I talked to Joseph Crow Feather, the oldest Cherokee elder still living near the forest. Joseph was 93 and claimed to remember stories his great-grandmother told him about Blood Mountain Hollow. "Bad place," he said, shaking his head. "Children who die too young, they don't rest easy. They get lonely, want other children to play with them forever." "That's just a story," I said. "Is it?" Joseph looked at me with cloudy eyes. "How many children you lost in that hollow now? 2? More coming. Always more coming until someone makes it stop." "Now, how do I make it stop?" "Cherokee way is to honor the dead, give them what they need so they rest. But these spirits, they've been angry too long. They want living children now. Won't take anything else." That night I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Emma standing in that circle of pale children. I kept thinking about what Pete had said. Kids who come to Blood Mountain Hollow don't leave. At 3 a.m. I grabbed my flashlight and walked out into the hollow. I told myself I was just making security rounds, but really I was hoping to see those children again. Maybe I could talk to them, convince them to let Emma and Miguel go. The forest was dead quiet. No wind, no animal sounds, no insects. Just my footsteps crunching through frost-covered leaves. The cold was getting worse every night, like winter was coming early just to this one spot. I made it about half a mile before I saw the lights. Small, flickering lights, like candles, dotting the hillside ahead of me. They were moving in a pattern, weaving back and forth through the trees. As I got closer, I could see they were carried by children, the same pale children from the meadow. But there were more of them now, maybe 15 or 20, walking in single file up the mountain. They wore old-fashioned clothes and carried candles or oil lamps, and they were all barefoot despite the freezing temperature. Emma and Miguel were with them, walking hand in hand at the end of the line. "Emma!" I called out. "Miguel!" The children stopped and turned to look at me. Their faces were beautiful but wrong somehow, too perfect, like porcelain dolls, and their eyes reflected my flashlight beam like animal eyes. Emma smiled and waved at me. "Hi, Mr. Marcus. We're going to play forever." Her voice sounded strange, hollow, like it was coming from the bottom of a well. "Emma, you need to come with me. Your parents are worried sick." "My parents are here too," she said, pointing to two of the pale children. They looked like adults, but child-sized. A man and woman holding hands, smiling with too many teeth. It's when I understood. These weren't just children. They were families. Whole families who had died in the hollow over the years, turned into something else. Something that stayed forever young and forever hungry for company. "Come play with us, Marcus," Emma said. "Your daughter is here too." One of the pale children stepped forward, and my heart stopped. It was Katie. My Katie. Looking exactly like she had the day she died. 7 years old, blonde curls, gap-toothed smile. "Daddy," she called out, running toward me. "I've been waiting for you." I dropped my flashlight and fell to my knees. Katie threw her arms around me, and she felt real, solid, and warm, and alive. "I missed you so much, Daddy. Will you stay and play with us? We can be together forever." Behind her, the other children were nodding and smiling. "Come play with us," their eyes seemed to say. "Stay in the hollow. Never leave. Never grow old. Never feel pain again." I couldn't speak. This was what I'd wanted since the day Katie died. To hold her again, to be with her forever. But then I saw Emma and Miguel still holding hands with the pale children, still smiling those wrong smiles. They weren't rescued. They were trapped. And if I stayed, no one would ever look for them again. "Katie," I whispered. "I can't. Those children need my help." Her smile faded. "But Daddy, I need you too. I've been so lonely." The temperature around me dropped 20 degrees in seconds. Frost began forming on the trees, and my breath came out in thick white clouds. "Choose, Marcus," said one of the pale adults. "Stay with your daughter forever, or lose her again. But choose quickly. Dawn is coming, and we must return to our rest." The eastern sky was already showing the first hint of gray. In a few minutes the sun would rise, and Katie would be gone again. I looked at my daughter's face, memorizing every detail. Then I toed up and stepped away from her. "I'm sorry, baby. Daddy has to help the other children first." Katie's face changed. Her perfect features twisted into something angry and hurt. "Then, you'll never see me again, Daddy. Never." All the pale children began to fade as the sun came up, but Katie's voice echoed through the hollow long after she vanished. "Never again, Daddy. Never again." Joseph Crowfeather was waiting at my ranger station when I got back that morning. He took one look at my face and nodded. "You saw them." "My daughter," I said. Katie was there. Spirit children take many forms. Show you what you want most. Make you want to stay. "How do I get Emma and Miguel back?" Joseph was quiet for a long time, staring out at Blood Mountain Hollow. "There is a way. Cherokee way. But it costs much." He explained the ritual. On the next new moon, 3 days away, I would have to go to the center of the burial ground at midnight. Bring offerings for the dead, tobacco, corn, and something precious. Speak the old words that would honor the spirits and ask them to release the living children. But spirits are angry, Joseph warned. Been angry long time. They might not listen. Might take you instead. What's the precious offering? Joseph looked at me sadly. Something you love more than your own life. Something that connects you to the dead child who leads them. My heart sank. Katie was the spirit leading the others, and the most precious thing I had was my memory of her. If I gave that up, I would forget my daughter completely, forever. But Emma and Miguel were still alive. They had parents who loved them, futures waiting for them. I couldn't let them stay trapped in the hollow just because I couldn't bear to forget Katie. The next 3 days passed like a nightmare. More search teams came and went. The FBI sent agents. News crews showed up from Nashville and Memphis. Blood Mountain Hollow was chaos, but no one found anything. Except more handprints on trees, more toys arranged in circles, more reports of children's voices in the woods, and Eve, re-night. The temperature dropped further. Ice was forming on the creek in October. Frost covered everything by dawn. The hollow was turning into a winter landscape in the middle of fall. On the night of the new moon, I went to Joseph Crowfeather's cabin. He was waiting with the ritual items, tobacco, corn, sage for burning, and he had something else, a small leather pouch. Memory medicine, he said. Cherokee way to forget what brings too much pain. You drink this, speak the words, make the offering. Your memories of your daughter will pass to the spirit world. She will have them to keep her happy, but you will not. I took the pouch, feeling its weight. Will it work? Maybe. Spirits might accept the trade, or they might take everything. Your memories, your life, the living children. Cherokee stories don't always have happy endings. At midnight, I walked into Blood Mountain Hollow for the last time. The burial ground was at the highest point, marked by ancient stones covered in Cherokee symbols. Moonless night made everything black shadows and silver starlight. I built a fire in the center of the stone circle and arranged the offerings around it. Tobacco, corn, sage. Then I opened the leather pouch and drank the bitter liquid inside. Spirits of Blood Mountain Hollow, I called out in English, then repeated the words in Cherokee as Joseph had taught me. I come to honor the dead and ask for mercy on the living. The temperature plummeted. Ice began forming on the stones around me, and then they appeared, all of them. Dozens of pale children and adults standing in circles around my fire. Emma and Miguel were in the front row, still holding hands with the spirit children, and behind them, all stood Katie. You came back, Daddy, she said. I came to make a trade. We know. Katie stepped forward. Your memories of me for the living children. Are you sure that's what you want? Once you forget me, I'll be gone forever, like I never existed at all. I looked at my daughter one last time. 7 years old, blonde curls, gap-toothed smile, the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. I'm sure. Then speak the words. I threw the sage on the fire and spoke the Cherokee prayer Joseph had taught me. Words asking the spirits to accept my offering and release their prisoners. Words of respect for the dead and love for the living. As I spoke, my memories began to fade. Katie's first steps, her first word, the day she was born. Christmas mornings, bedtime stories, the smell of her hair after her bath. Everything that made her real to me was slipping away like water through my fingers. The pale children began to glow brighter. The spirit adults smiled and nodded, and Katie walked up to me one last time. Thank you, Daddy. I'll keep all our memories safe. And someday when you're ready, maybe you can come play with us for real. She kissed my cheek, and I felt my love for her flowing out of me like blood from a wound. Not the love itself, that would always be there, but the specific memories that gave it shape and meaning. The last thing I remembered clearly was her name, Katie. My daughter's name was Katie. Then even that was gone. The spirits began to fade as dawn approached. But Emma and Miguel stayed solid, stayed real. The spell was broken. They were free. I don't remember much about getting them back to their parents. The memory medicine made everything fuzzy for a while, but I remember the crying, the hugging, the relief on everyone's faces. The official report said the children got lost in a cave system and finally found their way out. No one mentioned spirits or rituals or Cherokee burial grounds. That was 40 years ago. I'm retired now, but I still live at the edge of Blood Mountain Hollow. Still keep watch over the place. The hollow is different now, warmer. Birds sing there again, and animals have returned. Families camp there sometimes, and their children are always safe. But I pay a price every day for that. Safety. I know I had a daughter once. I can feel the empty space where she used to be in my heart. Like a missing tooth, my tongue can't stop probing. Sometimes I dream about a little girl with blonde hair, but I wake up not remembering her face. I know I lost someone I loved more than life itself, but I can't remember who she was, or how she died, or why it hurts so much. There's just this aching sadness that never goes away, and no reason I can name for it. Joseph Crowfeather died 5 years after the ritual. Before he passed, he told me what really happened in the hollow that night. "You gave the spirits what they needed most," he said. "Not your memories, but your love. They were lonely children who just wanted to be remembered by someone who cared. Now they rest easy, and the living are safe. But I can't remember her at all." Forgetting is not the same as not loving. You still love her, Marcus. You just love her in a way that doesn't hurt anymore. I've thought about that a lot over the years. Maybe he was right. Maybe there's a difference between remembering and loving. I still feel protective of other people's children. Still can't stand to see a kid in danger. That has to come from somewhere. Sometimes, on quiet nights when the moon is dark, I hear children laughing in the hollow. But it's not the hollow, desperate laughter I heard 40 years ago. It's the sound of children who are truly happy, truly at peace. And sometimes, just sometimes, I think I hear a little girl's voice among them calling me Daddy. I never answer. I learned my lesson about trying to hold on to what's already gone. But I listen, and I hope that wherever she is, whatever her name was, she knows I love her still, even if I can't remember why. Blood Mountain Hollow is safe now. Families camp there, children play there, and everyone goes home when they're supposed to. But I keep watch and my way, because some places need a guardian. Some places remember every soul that ever touched them, and some promises, once made, last forever, even when you can't remember making them. My name is Tom Ironwood, and I've been a park ranger for 10 years now. Before that, I spent 4 years in Vietnam doing things I try not to think about. These days, I patrol the Jefferson National Forest in Virginia, and most of the time it's quiet work. Just me, the trees, and the occasional lost hiker. I like the quiet. After the war, loud noises make me jumpy. Cities are too much. Out here in the forest, I can breathe. The trees don't judge you for the things you had to do. They just grow, season after season, like nothing else matters. But sometimes the quiet gets broken. It was August 1975, and we'd had no rain for 3 weeks. The leaves were brown and crispy, and even the streams were running low. I was checking water levels near Black Rock Ridge when the call came over my radio. "Tom, you there?" It was Sheriff Hawkins from the county. "Yeah, I'm here. Got a body up on the ridge. Hunter found it this morning. Can you get up there?" I sighed. Bodies in the wilderness usually meant one of 3 things: heart attack, fall, or bear. What happened? Don't know yet. But Tom, it's pretty bad. Real bad. The helicopter dropped me off about a mile from the scene. As I hiked up the rocky trail, I noticed something strange. No birds, no squirrels, no insects buzzing. The forest was dead quiet, like everything with sense had packed up and left. I found the body in a small clearing near the ridge top. The hunter was a middle-aged guy, maybe 50. His rifle was still in his hands, unfired. But what was left of him? I'd seen bad things in the war. Guys torn up by shrapnel, burned by napalm. But this was different. This looked like something had grabbed him and just played with him. The claw marks were huge, bigger than any bear I'd ever seen. 4 parallel gashes across his chest, each one deep enough to put your fist in. But here's the weird part. The guy was still mostly whole. Bears don't kill like this. When a bear gets you, it's messy, but quick. This looked like something had taken its time. I walked around the clearing, looking for tracks. The ground was hard from the drought, but I found some prints near a big oak tree. They were huge, at least 18 inches long, but they weren't bear paws. They looked almost human, like giant human feet, but with claws. "What the hell?" I muttered. The prints led away from the clearing and up toward the ridge. I followed them for about 50 yards before they vanished on the rocky ground. But something else caught my eye. Scratch marks on the trees. Deep gouges in the bark, like someone had dragged their fingernails down the trunk. Except these scratches started about 12 feet up. I radioed the sheriff. "Hawkins, I'm going to need the coroner up here, and maybe someone from Fish and Game." "That bad?" I looked back at the body, then up at the scratch marks. I don't know what killed this guy, but it wasn't any animal I've ever seen. By the time the helicopter came back, I'd photographed everything and bagged some evidence. But as we flew away, I kept looking back at Black Rock Ridge. The mountain looked normal from the air, just trees and rocks and shadows. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something up there was looking back at me. That night, I called my old Army buddy Jake, who worked for Fish and Game. I described what I'd found. "Sounds like a bear to me," he said. "Jake, I've seen bear kills. This wasn't a bear." "Then what was it?" I didn't have an answer for that. 3 days later, I was back on Black Rock Ridge with Dr. Sarah Chen, a wildlife expert from the university. She'd driven up from Charlottesville to look at my evidence. "The claw marks are definitely from a large predator," she said, studying my photographs. "But you're right. The spacing is all wrong. For a black bear. Too wide. Too deep." We hiked to the kill site. The body was gone, but the bloodstains were still there. Dr. Chen knelt down and studied the scratch marks on the nearby trees. "These gouges, they're at least 3 inches deep, and the height—" She stood up, looking puzzled. "Tom, what animal do you know that can reach 12 feet up a tree and still have the leverage to claw this deep?" "None," I said. "That's the problem." We spent the morning looking for more tracks. The drought had baked the ground hard as concrete, but we found a few partial prints near a dried-up creek bed. Dr. Chen made plaster casts while I scouted the area. That's when I found the second site. About a quarter mile from the first kill, I discovered another clearing. This one had been a campsite. I could see the remains of a fire ring and some scattered gear, but the tent was shredded, and there was blood on the ground. "Dr. Chen," I called, "you need to see this." She came running. When she saw the destroyed campsite, her face went pale. "Oh my God, is there a body?" "I don't think so, but look at this." I pointed to the tent. It hadn't just been torn. It had been opened with surgical precision. 3 parallel slashes, clean as a razor. What kind of animal opens a tent like it's unzipping it? We searched the area but found no trace of whoever had been camping, just some torn clothes and a lot of blood. But we did find more of those impossible footprints, heading deeper into the forest. "We should call this in," Dr. Chen said. I nodded, but as I reached for my radio, we heard something that made us both freeze. A sound from somewhere up on the ridge, low and rumbling, like a growl. But there was something almost human about it, like it was trying to form words. Dr. Chen grabbed my arm. "What was that?" "I don't know. But we're leaving. Now." As we hiked back toward the helicopter landing zone, I kept looking over my shoulder. The forest was still too quiet, but now it felt different. It felt like we were being watched. That evening, I drove into town to talk to some of the old-timers at Murphy's Tavern. These were guys who'd hunted and fished these mountains their whole lives. If anyone would know about unusual animals, they would. Black Rock Ridge? Old Pete Murphy shook his head. Ain't nobody hunted up there for years. Not since the troubles started. What troubles? Pete glanced around the bar, then leaned in close. Every 20, 30 years, something happens up there. People go missing, animals acting strange. My grandfather used to tell stories about it, called it the walking bear. Walking bear? Thing that looks like a bear but walks on two legs like a man. And smart, too. Smart enough to hunt like a person instead of an animal. I bought Pete another beer. When was the last time? Oh, must have been the early 50s. 3 hunters went up there during deer season. Only one came back, and he was crazy as a loon. Kept talking about a bear that could talk. I felt a chill run down my spine. Talk? That's what he said. Of course, nobody believed him. Figured he'd been drinking, but then they found the other 2 hunters. Pete's voice dropped to a whisper. What was left of them, anyway? I drove home that night thinking about Pete's story. Part of me wanted to dismiss it as mountain folklore, but I'd seen those claw marks. I'd heard that growl, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something up on Black Rock Ridge was just getting started. I should have stayed away from the ridge, should have filed my report and let someone else deal with it. But I kept thinking about those missing campers. If they were still alive up there, someone had to find them. So I went back. This time, alone. It was early morning when I started up the trail, my rifle slung across my back and enough supplies for 2 days. The forest was still eerily quiet, but as I climbed higher, I started noticing other things. Sarsi, ratches on trees that hadn't been there before. The smell of something dead and rotting. And tracks. Always those impossible 18-inch footprints, like they were being left just for me to find. By noon, I'd reached the area where the campsite had been destroyed. I set up a basic camp nearby, hiding it behind some rocks where it couldn't be seen from the main trail. Then I settled in to wait. Hours passed. The sun moved across the sky and the temperature started to drop. That was another weird thing. Even though it was late summer, it got cold up here at night. Unnatural cold, like something was sucking the heat right out of the air. As darkness fell, I built a small fire and heated up some canned beans. I was just finishing dinner when I heard it. Footsteps in the forest. Slow, deliberate steps, like something heavy was walking through the trees. I grabbed my rifle and listened. The footsteps circled my camp, staying just outside the ring of firelight. Round and round they went, never getting closer, never moving away, just letting me know they were there. "Hello?" I called out. "Anyone there?" The footsteps stopped. Then, from somewhere in the darkness, came a sound that made my blood freeze. It was like a growl, but deeper. And underneath it, I could swear I heard something that sounded like words. Soul. Dire. My hands shook as I raised the rifle. "Who's out there?" Nothing. Just silence. I stayed awake all night feeding the fire and watching the tree line. Every now and then I'd catch a glimpse of something moving in the shadows, something big and dark that walked upright. But whenever I tried to get a better look, it would vanish. When morning came, I found fresh tracks all around my campsite. They formed a perfect circle, like something had spent the entire night walking around me. But the strangest thing was what I found near the fire ring. 4 long scratches in the dirt, like claw marks, and arranged next to them, 3 stones placed in a neat triangle. No animal arranges stones. No animal leaves messages. I packed up fast and ked to higher ground, looking for a better vantage point. About a mile up the ridge, I found an old fire tower, just a wooden platform built around a tall pine tree. I climbed up and used my binoculars to scan the forest below. That's when I saw it. Moving through the trees about 100 yards away was something that shouldn't exist. It walked on 2 legs like a man, but it was huge, maybe 9 feet tall. Its body was covered in dark fur, and its arms were longer than any human's. But the worst part was its face. Even from a distance, I could see it wasn't quite animal and not quite human either, and it was looking right at me. We stared at each other across the forest. Then the thing raised one massive arm, almost like it was waving, and melted back into the trees. I climbed down from the tower with my heart hammering in my chest. Whatever was up here, it was intelligent. It had been watching me, studying me, and now it wanted me to know it was there. That night, I made camp in a small cave I found near the ridge top. I figured solid rock at my back would be safer than sleeping in the open, but as I sat in the cave entrance, keeping watch, I heard something that made me realize how wrong I was. Scratching. Coming from deep inside the cave, like something with very long claws was slowly working its way toward me through the rock. I grabbed my gear and ran. I spent the next day hiking down toward the main trail, ready to call for backup. This was beyond anything one person could handle. But as I reached the lower slopes, I found something that changed everything. A body, fresh, still warm. It was a young woman, maybe 25, wearing hiking gear. She'd been killed the same way as the hunter, those massive claw marks across her chest. But this time I could see she'd put up a fight. There was blood under her fingernails, and her backpack was full of gear that had been torn apart by something desperate to get inside. In her jacket pocket, I found a note written in shaky handwriting. Day 3. It's following us. David thinks we can make it to the road, but I don't think it wants us to leave. It's not just hunting us, it's hurting us, driving us deeper into the mountains. I can hear it at night, outside our tent. It sounds like it's trying to talk. David, the missing camper from the destroyed tent. He was still up there somewhere. I looked at the woman's body, then up at Black Rock Ridge. This thing wasn't just killing randomly. It was playing with people like a cat with mice. And I was next. But I was also a soldier, and soldiers don't run from a fight. I hiked back up the mountain as the sun was setting. This time, I didn't try to hide. I walked right up the main trail, making noise, letting it know I was coming. When I reached the area near the ridge top, I stopped in a small clearing and shouted, "I know you're out there. I know you can understand me. Come on!" For a moment, nothing happened. Then the trees around the clearing began to rustle, even though there was no wind. Something big was moving through the forest, circling me again. But this time, it was getting closer. "You want me? Here I am." The rustling stopped. The forest went dead quiet. Then it stepped into the clearing. Up close, it was even more terrifying than I'd imagined. 9 feet tall and covered in thick, dark fur. Its arms were massive, ending in claws that looked like they could cut through steel. But its face was the worst part. It was like someone had tried to cross a bear with a human and gotten something that was neither. Intelligence burned in its yellow eyes. The same kind of intelligence I'd seen in enemy soldiers back in Vietnam. It stood there for a long moment, just looking at me. Then it opened its mouth and spoke. The voice was deep and rough, like gravel being poured over broken glass, but the words were clear. "You are soldier." My rifle was in my hands, but I couldn't seem to raise it. "What are you?" The thing tilted its head, studying me. "Was soldier, like you. Long time ago." "That's impossible." It took a step closer and I could smell it now. Wet fur and old blood and something else. Something that reminded me of the jungle in Vietnam, of death and fear and things best forgotten. "War," it said. "War makes monsters. You know this." I found my voice. "The Civil War? You're from the Civil War?" A sound that might have been laughter came from its throat. "Ran from war. Came to mountains. Met old medicine man. He showed me what happens to cowards." The pieces started falling together. "You deserted during the Civil War, and someone cursed you. Cherokee, shaman, said I would walk these mountains until I found courage. But courage is a hard thing to find." It was close enough now that I could see the human intelligence in its eyes. This wasn't just a monster. It was a man who'd been trapped in a monster's body for over 100 years. The people you killed. Hunt, it said simply. Must hunt. Curse makes me hunt. But you, it leaned closer. You smell like war, like killing, like me. That's when I understood. It hadn't been randomly killing people. It had been looking for someone who would understand. Another soldier. Someone who knew what it felt like to be changed by war. What do you want from me? The creature straightened up to its full height. Fight me, it said. Fight me like soldier. Help me. Find courage. Or die trying. I looked into its yellow eyes and saw something I recognized. The same look I'd seen in my own mirror every morning since coming back from Vietnam. The look of someone carrying too much weight. Too many ghosts. And if I win, then curse is broken, and I can finally rest. I raised my rifle, not because I wanted to kill it, but because I understood what it needed, what we both needed. Okay, soldier, I said, let's finish this war. The fight lasted maybe 10 minutes, but it felt like hours. The creature was fast. Faster than anything that big had, a right to be. It came at me like a freight train, claws extended, and I barely got out of the way. My first shot caught it in the shoulder, spinning it around, but not dropping it. Good, it roared. Fight like... You mean it. We circled each other in the clearing. This wasn't like fighting in Vietnam. There the enemy tried to kill you quick and quiet. This thing wanted a real battle. It wanted to test itself against another warrior. My second shot went wide. The creature lunged forward and caught me across the ribs with its claws, sending me tumbling across the ground. I rolled, came up firing, and put a round center mass. The creature staggered, but kept coming. Harder, it demanded. Fight. Harder. That's when I realized something. It wasn't just fighting me, it was fighting the curse. Every time I heard it, every time I pushed back, the human part of it grew stronger. The yellow glow in its eyes was getting brighter, more focused. We fought until we were both bleeding and exhausted. Finally, I managed to get behind a fallen log and put my rifle to my shoulder for a clear shot. The creature stood in the middle of the clearing, arms spread wide, offering itself as a target. Do it, it said. And for the first time, its voice sounded completely human. Please. I'm so tired. I looked down my rifle sight and saw not a monster, but a man. A young soldier who'd made one mistake over a century ago and had been paying for it ever since. What's your name? I asked. William, it said. William Harper. Company C, 23rd Virginia Infantry. William, I said, you've been a soldier long enough. Time to go home. I pulled the trigger. The creature, William, took the shot in the chest and fell to his knees. But as he fell, something amazing happened. The fur began to fade away, the claws retracted, and the massive frame shrank down to normal human size. By the time he hit the ground, he looked like what he'd always been underneath. Just a scared young man in a torn gray uniform. He looked up at me with human eyes, brown, not yellow, and smiled. Thank you, he whispered. Then he closed his eyes and was still. I knelt beside him for a long time, listening to the forest come back to life around us. Birds started singing. Insects buzzed. Somewhere in the distance, I could hear a stream running. When I finally hiked back down the mountain, I found David, the missing camper, tied to a tree about a mile from where William had fallen. He was dehydrated and scared out of his mind, but alive. Is it gone? He kept asking as I cut him loose. Is the monster gone? Yeah, I said. It's gone. I never told anyone the whole truth about what happened on Black Rock Ridge. The official report said a rogue bear had been responsible for the deaths and that I'd tracked it down and killed it. They found William's body, of course, but by then it just looked like the remains of some old hermit who'd died in the woods. But I kept the gray uniform button I found next to his body. And sometimes, when my own war memories get too heavy, I take it out and remember a young soldier who finally found his way home. The nightmares I'd had since Vietnam, they stopped after that night on the ridge. I still think about the war sometimes, but it doesn't eat at me the way it used to. Maybe helping William find peace helped me find some too. They say trauma can change you, make you into something you don't recognize. I learned that's true. But I also learned that sometimes, if you're lucky, you get a chance to change back. The mountains around Black Rock Ridge are quiet now. Really quiet, the way they're supposed to be. And every time I patrol up there, I remember that some wars don't end when the shooting stops. Sometimes they go on for generations until Mion finally has the courage to put down their weapon and help an old enemy find rest. My name is Tom Ironwood, and that's the story of the last soldier of the Civil War. May he finally rest in peace.